The water is cold. Not the cold of a winter river or a shaded mountain lake. Something older than that. Something that has never known warmth in the way warmth would one day be understood. You're beneath the surface of a sea that has no name yet, in a world that has not yet invented the concept of naming anything at all. The darkness here is total. Absolute. A darkness so deep and so complete that the concept of light feels like something you dreamed once and cannot quite remember. But you're not afraid. There is no fear here. Not yet. Fear requires a nervous system old enough to anticipate. Fear requires a creature that knows what it means to be hunted, to be found, to be consumed. And you're something else entirely. You're the first, or nearly the first. One of the first animals on this planet to lie still in the dark and feel something that might, if you squinted at it from a distance of 500 million years, resemble peace. The pressure of the water is gentle around you. It holds you the way a cocoon holds something that is not yet finished becoming. The sediment beneath you is soft, a fine grey silt that has settled over millions of years of slow geological patience, layer upon layer, pressed down by the weight of ocean that begins somewhere far above and ends here, at the bottom, where you rest. You can feel the texture of it against your underside. It is cool, it is steady. Nothing about it changes. Somewhere, very far above you, the surface of the ancient Cambrian Sea catches starlight. Not the stars you know, older stars, slightly different in their arrangement, though no less constant in their indifference. The light does not reach you here, you do not need it to. You're the kind of creature for whom light is a rumour, something that exists in other parts of the world, a thing that happens to other beings in other places. Down here, in the quiet, in the cold, in the silt, you simply are. And that is enough, for now in this ancient darkness being is enough. Rest a little deeper. The water will hold you. It always has. Welcome. You have arrived somewhere very old. Older than bones. Older than teeth. Older, even, than the idea that some things end and other things continue. You have arrived at the edge of the Cambrian period, 540 million years before anyone would sit down and try to put a number on it, in an ocean that covered most of what would eventually become several different continents, none of which have been invented yet. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this, subscribe. I post stories like this weekly. Tonight, we are not going to rush through this world. We are not going to catalogue it or categorise it or pin it to a board like a specimen under glass. We are simply going to drift through it, the way you drift through a half-remembered dream in the hour before morning, gently, without urgency, following whatever catches the slow attention of a mind that is already beginning to let go. The Cambrian Sea exists in a way that requires a certain kind of stillness to understand. It is not empty. In fact, it is more densely populated in its quiet corners than anything you might imagine. But its fullness is the fullness of things that have not yet learned to be loud. The animals here do not roar or bellow or crash through underbrush. They drift. They filter. They press themselves against the soft floor of an ocean that is older than any ocean alive today, and they wait, in the way that simple creatures wait, without impatience, without the understanding of time that impatience requires. You are here in the midnight hours of the Cambrian Sea. It is the deepest part of the night in a world that has not yet invented morning as a concept to look forward to. The water around you is rich with dissolved minerals, calcium and phosphorus and silica and a dozen other elements that your body, in its elegant simplicity, is already beginning to learn how to use. The ocean tastes of chemistry. It tastes of possibility. If you could taste it, which perhaps in some very basic way you already can, it would taste the way the air before a storm tastes, full of something that is about to happen, but not quite yet. The creatures that surround you are extraordinary, not because they are large or fast or fierce. They are none of those things, not yet, but because they exist at all, because 540 million years ago, the mere fact of complex animal life was a miracle so recent that the planet was still getting used to it. The ocean had spent billions of years preparing for this moment. Billions of years of single cells dividing and drifting and dying and leaving behind trace amounts of oxygen. Billions of years of chemistry accumulating toward a threshold that, once crossed, would change everything that would ever come after. You crossed that threshold. Or rather, your kind did. And now you rest here in the cold and dark of the Cambrian midnight, a creature so new to existence that the universe itself has barely noticed you are here. But you are here. You are real. You are the first chapter of something that will not finish for another 540 million years and counting. Let yourself settle into the silt a little more deeply. The water is cool but not uncomfortable. There is nowhere you need to be. There is nothing you need to do. The night is long in the Cambrian Sea, longer perhaps than any night you have ever known, and there is time, so much time, simply to rest here and let the story of this ancient world wash over you like the slow current that moves through these deep, cold, perfect waters. To understand the Cambrian Sea as it exists tonight, you need to first understand the silence that came before it. Not the silence of an empty room or a quiet library, or a forest at 3 a.m. Those are silences that humans invented, silences that exist in relation to the noise that surrounds them. The silence before the Cambrian was something else entirely. It was a silence 4 billion years deep. The Earth was old before the Cambrian began. Impossibly, incomprehensibly old in the way that only geological time can be old. 4.5 billion years old, give or take, which means that when the first complex animals appeared in the Cambrian oceans, the planet had already lived through most of its life without them. It had already endured the cooling of its molten surface. It had already invented oceans and continents and the slow, grinding machinery of tectonic plates. It had already been struck by a body roughly the size of Mars, a collision so enormous that the debris coalesced into the moon, your moon, which hangs above the Cambrian Sea tonight in its ancient orbit, perhaps slightly closer than it will be in your own time. And through all of that, through the cooling and the collisions and the slow accumulation of an atmosphere, life had been there. Life had been there almost from the beginning, or at least from the very moment conditions allowed for it, which says something profound about what life is and what it wants, and how insistently it persists in the face of everything that tries to stop it. But that early life was small. So small, single cells mostly. Bacteria and archaea and the strange chemical processes that they carried out in the ancient seas, processes that would seem almost incomprehensibly humble compared to what those processes would eventually produce. For 3 billion years, the ocean was full of single cells. Just that. Just the quiet chemical business of single cells dividing and dying and releasing their contents back into the water over and over and over again, in a cycle so slow and so persistent that it is hard to hold in the mind all at once. 3 billion years of microbial life. 3 billion years of the ocean's chemistry being quietly, incrementally adjusted by the metabolic work of organisms you would not be able to see without a microscope. 3 billion years, and then, slowly at first, and then all at once, something changed. The oxygen changed. That is the simple version. The photosynthetic bacteria that had been releasing oxygen as a byproduct of their work for billions of years had finally, slowly, saturated enough of the ocean and then the atmosphere with that oxygen that other kinds of chemistry became possible. Oxygen is a reactive element. It forms bonds readily, it energizes reactions, it makes possible the kind of high-powered cellular metabolism that large, complex animals require. Without enough of it, complexity is not possible. With it, complexity is not just possible, it becomes, in some sense, inevitable. But the transition was not smooth. Nothing about the deep history of the Earth is smooth. Between the world of single-celled life and the world of the Cambrian, there was a crisis, several crises in fact, that very nearly ended the story before it could properly begin. You have heard perhaps of the Snowball Earth. Perhaps the name conjures an image. The planet wrapped entirely in ice, white from pole to pole, the ocean sealed beneath a kilometre of frozen water, temperatures at the equator that would kill anything alive today. This is roughly what happened, more than once. The oldest of these glaciations occurred around 700 million years ago, then again around 650 million years ago, and perhaps once more after that, though geologists are still debating the details. What they agree on is the essential shape of the event. The planet froze, almost completely. Life retreated to whatever warm pockets remained around hydrothermal vents and beneath ice thin enough to allow some photosynthesis. For millions of years, the surface of the Earth was a desert of ice and rock, and the sky was clear of clouds because there was so little water evaporating, and the sun shone down on a white and silent and seemingly dead world. And then the volcanoes saved it. Not on purpose. Volcanoes do not have purposes, but through the slow accumulation of carbon dioxide released over millions of years of eruption, with no rain to wash it out of the atmosphere because the water cycle was frozen, the greenhouse effect was allowed to build until finally, catastrophically, the ice broke. The warming, when it came, was not gradual. It was a cascade. The ice reflected sunlight, which kept the planet cold, which kept the ice stable, until the tipping point was reached and the ice began to melt, at which point the darker ocean and land absorbed more sunlight, which warmed the planet faster, which melted more ice, and so on in a feedback loop that transformed the planet from a snowball to something close to a hothouse within a geologically short period. The meltwater carried with it enormous quantities of minerals that had been locked in glacial rock for millions of years. Phosphorus, calcium, iron, all the chemical building blocks that life needs to build complexity. These flooded into the warming oceans. The ocean chemistry changed rapidly. The conditions for something new were at last in place. And what came first into those nutrient-rich, warming, oxygen-accumulating waters was the Ediacaran fauna, the creatures that came before the Cambrian, the ancestors and precursors and evolutionary experiments that preceded the world you're resting in tonight. They were extraordinary in their own way. Soft-bodied organisms, many of them, creatures that grew in shapes that have no modern analogues, frond-like things, disc-shaped things, quilted mattress-like things that lay flat against the seafloor and absorbed nutrients through their surfaces. They were large, some of them, by the standards of what had come before. Some grew to more than a metre in length, but they were quiet. They were passive. They drifted and filtered and absorbed in a world that had not yet invented the concept of eating another living thing. That world ended. Not suddenly, but it ended. The Ediacaran fauna faded away across a span of millions of years, replaced, overwhelmed, outcompeted, perhaps consumed, by the animals of the Cambrian, by creatures with mouths, with eyes, with the ability to move with purpose and to pursue and to flee. The Cambrian Sea is the world that emerged from that transition, and it is the world you are resting in tonight. You've arrived at the moment when the world became interesting in an entirely new way, not the interest of chemistry or geology, which the world had always been, but the interest of biology, of creatures with enough complexity to have experiences, however simple, of a world they had not made and could not control. The interest of animals, the interest of life that moves. And what does it feel like to be the first? To be among the earliest complex animals to lie still in the cold water of an ancient sea, surrounded by the soft sounds of a world in the process of inventing itself? Perhaps it feels like this, like the weight of the water pressing gently, like the texture of the silt, like the faint chemical taste of the ocean, like nothing you need to name or understand or explain, like simply being here, in the dark, while the world goes on around you in its ancient and unhurried way. The world before you was 4 billion years of preparation. The world around you is the first chapter of everything that comes next. And you are here for all of it, resting quietly in the place where it begins. Let the thought of that settle over you like silt, slowly, without hurry. There is time. Let us talk about what you are, not in the clinical language of taxonomy, phyla and genera and species names that belong to a future that has not been invented yet, but in the language of sensation, of architecture, of the quiet mechanical fact of your existence in this cold and ancient water. You are small. Perhaps the most important thing to understand about you is that you are small. In a world without whales or dolphins or the great pelagic fish that will not evolve for another 100 million years, small is not a disadvantage. Small is, in many ways, the appropriate response to a world that is still figuring out how to be a world. Small means you need less. Small means you can find enough food in a relatively limited area. Small means that the energy budget of your existence, the careful accounting of calories in and calories out that all life must balance, is a manageable equation. You have a body plan that is, by the standards of 540 million years hence, remarkably sophisticated. You are bilaterally symmetrical, that is, the left side of you is a mirror of the right side, which is a profound organizational achievement in the context of life's history. Bilateral symmetry implies direction. It implies a front end and a back end, which implies movement with purpose, which implies a nervous system capable of directing that movement, which implies, at least in its most rudimentary form, something that could be called intention. You have a front end. This, in the context of the history of life on Earth, is extraordinary. Before bilateral symmetry became common, organisms had no preferred direction of movement. They were radially symmetrical, like a sea anemone, like a jellyfish, or they were simply formless, flowing through the water or across the substrate without anything that could be called a destination. But you have a front end and a back end, and your front end is specialized for sensing the world, and your back end is specialized for propelling you through it. And this simple organizational principle, this arrow of direction built into your very body plan, is the foundation on which all the vertebrates and arthropods and annelids and mollusks and chordates of the next 500 million years will be built. What does it feel like to have a body plan? You cannot answer that question, not in the way the question is being asked. But perhaps there is something in the simple fact of having a preferred direction, of always moving front first into whatever the world presents, that feels like a kind of confidence. Not the aggressive confidence of a predator, not yet, but the quiet confidence of a creature that knows, in whatever way it knows anything, which way it is going. Your body is soft. There is no shell around you, no hard exoskeleton, no mineralized armor of any kind. The hard structures that will define so many of the Cambrian's most famous creatures, the trilobites with their segmented carapaces, the small shelly fauna with their phosphatic plates. Those are innovations that belong to other lineages, or to evolutionary developments that either you or your descendants will encounter in the millions of years to come. For now, you are a creature of softness. Muscle and connective tissue and the thin membranes that separate your interior chemistry from the ocean's exterior chemistry, those are what you are made of. But soft does not mean fragile. You are, in the context of this world and this moment, a remarkably successful design. Your muscles, though primitive by the standards of what will follow, give you the ability to move in ways that your Ediacaran predecessors could not. You can contract one side of your body and extend the other, creating the sinuous lateral undulation that propels you through the water with a fluency that earlier soft-bodied organisms, which moved more like drifting leaves than swimming animals, could not manage. You can steer, you can slow down, you can, within the limits of your sensory world, choose. Your sensory apparatus is simple and beautiful in its simplicity. You can detect changes in the chemistry of the water around you, gradients of food and perhaps of danger, expressed as concentrations of molecules that your primitive chemoreceptors register and your primitive nervous system translates into behavior. You lean toward food. You lean away from whatever your body has learned to associate with threat. This is the most basic form of intelligence that exists, and it is enough. For now, it is enough. You may have some sensitivity to light, not vision as it will one day be understood, not the image-forming vision of the Anomalocaris with its compound eyes, not the precise stereoscopic vision that will eventually give rise to the calculating gaze of predators and the vigilant scanning of prey, but a general sense of light and dark, of whether you're in shadow or in the relative brightness of shallower water. This sensitivity to light helps you orient yourself. It tells you something about the time of day, about the depth at which you are swimming, about whether you are in the open water or beneath something that is blocking the light from above. And tonight, the light above you says, midnight. The Cambrian sky above the surface of this sea is dark and rich with stars, and the moon rides somewhere in its ancient orbit, and none of that light reaches you here at the bottom. The chemoreceptors that serve as your most important sense organs are registering the steady chemical composition of the deep sediment and the bottom water, and everything they tell you is safe, still, unchanged, good. There is a word for the state you're in. It will not be invented for hundreds of millions of years, but the state itself is real, and it is ancient, and it is something that all the complex animals that will ever evolve will, in some form, experience. The word is rest. And what you're doing right now, settled into the silt of the Cambrian seafloor with your soft body still, and your chemical senses monitoring a world that is perfectly profoundly undisturbed, is exactly that. The architecture of you is ancient. It is the blueprint from which almost everything that will come after will be derived. Inside you, running along your dorsal surface perhaps, or distributed through a network of simple nerve fibers, is the beginning of a nervous system, not a brain, not yet, or at least not in the form that word will eventually imply. But something, a collection of nerve cells that receive signals from your sensory organs and send signals to your muscles, creating the loop of sensation and response that is the fundamental mechanism of animal behavior. This nervous system, simple as it is the most complicated thing on Earth. Nothing anywhere on this planet in this moment has anything comparable. The single-celled organisms that make up the majority of the ocean's biomass have no nervous systems at all. They respond to their environment through direct chemical means, through the proteins in their membranes that change shape when they encounter certain molecules, through processes that are elegant and effective, but that do not involve anything that could be called experience. You are different. You have something that processes information about the world, something that integrates signals from multiple sources and produces coordinated responses, something that, in however humble a form, represents the universe beginning to know itself. Think about that, if you can hold the thought as you drift towards sleep. 540 million years ago, on a planet that had existed for 4 billion years, without anything capable of what might be called awareness, you were here. You were the beginning of the nervous systems that would eventually produce human consciousness, the ability to wonder about the universe, the capacity to look back across 500 million years and imagine the creature that started it all. You were the first complex thing that ever rested in the dark and, in some tiny chemical primitive way, felt that the resting was good. Close your eyes, or whatever you use in place of eyes tonight, and let the Cambrian Sea hold you. You have earned this rest. You always have. If you are still with us here, drifting through the ancient Cambrian Sea, if the cold water and the soft silt and the quiet darkness of 540 million years ago feel like a place you want to return to, then subscribe so the next story is waiting when you come back. Sleep well, and we will continue. The seafloor beneath you is not the seafloor you might imagine if you have seen images of the modern deep ocean. It is not barren. It is not a featureless plain of grey mud stretching to the limits of visibility in every direction. It is, in its own quiet way, a community, a neighbourhood, a place that has been inhabited long enough for its inhabitants to have shaped it to their habits and their needs, in the way that any inhabited place eventually bears the marks of the lives lived there. The most obvious feature of this seafloor, the thing that you would notice first if you could see it, and perhaps you can sense it even in the dark through the chemical gradients that your sensory organs are always quietly reading, is the microbial mat. It covers the surface of the sediment the way moss covers a stone in a forest, or lichen covers a rock on a mountainside, or the skin covers a wound that is in the process of healing. It is thin, perhaps a few millimeters thick in most places, thicker in others, where the conditions have been particularly favourable. But it is everywhere, or nearly everywhere, and it has been building itself here for longer than you have been alive. Microbial mats are among the oldest biological structures on Earth. They build themselves in layers, photosynthetic bacteria on top, where the light penetrates, and beneath them layer after layer of different microbial communities, each one living on what the layer above it produces and discards, in a vertical column of ecology so ancient that its ancestors were building these same structures in these same ways 2 billion years before you came along. In the absence of complex animals, and for most of Earth's history complex animals were absent, microbial mats were the dominant form of life on the planet's surface. They covered the shallow ocean floors. They lined the edges of ancient lakes. They are, in a sense, the original landscape of the inhabited Earth. But you are here now, and your kind, the animals of the Cambrian, the new and bustling community of complex creatures that has arrived over the past few million years with their muscles, and their nervous systems and their appetites, are changing the microbial mat in ways that the mat has never experienced before. Where earlier animals simply lay on the mat's surface and absorbed nutrients passively, some of the Cambrian's new arrivals are beginning to burrow into it, to disturb it, to mix the layers in ways that alter the chemistry of the sediment, releasing gases that had been locked in the anoxic layers below, redistributing nutrients that had been accumulating in particular zones for millennia. This is a revolution. It will not feel like a revolution tonight, lying still in the quiet dark, but it is. The bioturbation, the biological disturbance of the sediment by burrowing and moving animals, that begins in the Cambrian will permanently alter the chemistry of the ocean floor. It will oxygenate sediments that had been anaerobic for millions of years. It will mix organic matter in ways that accelerate decomposition and nutrient cycling. It will create new ecological niches, new opportunities, new pressures. It will change everything about the seafloor ecology in ways that will not be fully reversed for the rest of the planet's history. But not tonight. Tonight, the map beneath you is largely undisturbed. It lies quiet and thick and full of its own chemical activity, its layers exchanging gases and nutrients in the slow, patient rhythm of microbial life. You rest on its surface. Your weight, negligible in this water, presses the upper layers of the mat very slightly, creating a shallow impression of your body in the soft biological material. When you eventually move on, the mat will slowly refill that impression, the way water fills a footprint in wet sand. All around you on the seafloor, other creatures are also resting, or moving slowly, or doing the quiet chemical business of the Cambrian night. There are animals here whose names have not been invented yet, whose taxonomic positions are still being debated by paleontologists who will not be born for another 540 million years. They are strange by any modern standard, their body plans unfamiliar, their evolutionary histories complex and disputed, but in the context of this moment they are simply neighbours, simply the other creatures who share this stretch of seafloor on this particular night in the early Cambrian. Some of them are filter feeders, drawing water through their bodies and extracting the nutritious particles that drift past. This is a simple and extraordinarily effective strategy for feeding. The ocean is full of organic matter, of bacterial cells and dead algae, and the shed mucus of other animals and the chemical compounds released by all the biological activity happening everywhere in the water column above. A creature positioned correctly on the seafloor, with the right kind of filtration apparatus, can extract a perfectly adequate living from the water that passes over it without ever moving at all. Others move, slowly for the most part. They creep across the surface of the mat, following chemical gradients toward concentrations of food. Their tracks are visible in the sediment behind them, faint traces, thin lines pressed into the silt by the passage of soft bodies. These traces are, in fact, some of the earliest evidence that paleontologists will find of complex animal life. The trace fossils of the earliest Cambrian, the burrows and trails pressed into ancient sediment, are sometimes the only evidence that animals were present at all, in the periods before animals developed hard parts that preserve well in the fossil record. Your own movement, if you are moving tonight, leaves such a trace. A thin, shallow line in the grey-green silt, a record of your passage, in some very improbable future, one so far away that imagining it requires a kind of mental vertigo. That trace might be preserved in rock, compressed under the weight of sediment accumulated over millions of years, and a human being might look at it and know that you were here, that you moved through this water, that you were real. But that is a thought for another time. For now, the trace is just a trace. The seafloor is just the seafloor. The night is just the night, deep and cold and full of the quiet chemical conversation of microbial mats and soft-bodied animals and the slow drift of organic particles from the water column above. There is a current here. It is not strong, not the kind of current that would carry you anywhere you did not intend to go, but it is present. A slow, steady movement of water from one direction to another, driven by the temperature differential between the deep cold water and the slightly warmer water of the shallows, by the slow rotation of the earth, by forces so large and so slow that they are essentially geological in character. The current moves through your chemoreceptors like information. It tells you things about the water, its temperature, its oxygen content, its chemical composition, all of it ordinary, all of it expected, all of it confirming what your simple nervous system already knew. Everything is fine, everything is as it should be. The seafloor is steady, the water is cold, the current is gentle, the darkness is complete, and you are here in the middle of it all, a small, soft, bilateral creature of the early Cambrian, resting in the place where the first chapter of the animal kingdom is being written, one quiet moment at a time. The question of what you dream about, if you dream at all, is one that no one can answer. Dreams may require a complexity of nervous system that belongs to a much later time. But perhaps there is something, some faint chemical echo of the day's feeding, some residual pattern in the simple circuitry of your nervous system that continues to play through the night in a quieter register. Perhaps this is what sleep is, at its most fundamental. the nervous system continuing its work in the absence of the world's demands, running through patterns, settling into equilibrium, resting in the way that only a complex system can rest, not by stopping, but by slowing. The seafloor holds you, the darkness holds you. The Cambrian night is very long and very quiet and perfectly, completely safe. The water around you is not water in the way you might mean the word on an ordinary day, or rather it is water, hydrogen and oxygen, bonded in the ratio that produces the most common liquid on the planet's surface. But it is water that carries within it such a particular and specific chemistry that it is worth pausing to consider what you are immersed in tonight, what this ancient ocean is composed of, and how it came to be what it is. The Cambrian Ocean is warmer than the deep ocean of today, not dramatically so, not warm enough to feel warm, by any standard that would mean warmth to a creature who knows what warmth is, but measurably, detectably warmer at depth than the deep water of the modern Earth, for reasons that have to do with the configuration of the continents. In the Cambrian world, the continents are arranged very differently than they will be in any period you might recognise. There is no Atlantic Ocean. There is no Pacific in the form that will eventually give that name its meaning. Instead, there are ancient ocean basins and ancient cratons, the stable cores of ancient continents, arranged in a pattern that modern geologists can reconstruct only imperfectly from the traces left in ancient rock. What the arrangement of the continents does is determine where the currents flow, and where the currents flow determines where the nutrient-rich deep water upwells to the surface, and where and how much oxygen dissolves into the ocean from the atmosphere, and how warmth is distributed from the equator toward the poles. The Cambrian Ocean's circulation is different from any ocean that exists today, and that circulation is one of the things that makes this water what it is, this particular mixture of chemistry and temperature and oxygen content that you are resting in tonight. The oxygen content of the Cambrian Ocean is lower than you might expect. Not so low as to be a crisis. There is enough oxygen here in these bottom waters to sustain the life that lives here, but lower than the well-oxygenated oceans of the modern era. The deep ocean, in the Cambrian, shades toward anoxia in ways that the deep ocean still does today in some zones, but more extensively, more pervasively. There are parts of the Cambrian seafloor where oxygen is essentially absent, where only the sulfur-reducing bacteria and other anaerobic organisms can survive. You're not in one of those places tonight. The water here has enough oxygen for your needs, which are modest, but the anoxic zones are not far away, and they are a feature of this world in a way that they are not, quite, of the world that you might know from other contexts. The chemistry of the water carries calcium in concentrations that are changing, slowly, over millions of years, in ways that the chemistry of the Earth's oceans always changes, but that in the Cambrian moment represent a particular kind of richness. Calcium is useful. It is the element from which shells and bones and teeth and the mineralized defenses of all the armored animals of the Cambrian and every period after will be made. The ocean has always had calcium in it, dissolved from the rocks that rivers wash over and deliver to the sea, but the concentration has varied, and in the Cambrian the concentration is such that it is relatively easy for organisms to extract calcium from the water and precipitate it into hard structures. This is happening all around you, not in you. You're a soft-bodied creature, one of the many soft-bodied creatures of the Cambrian Sea, but in other animals nearby, and in the slowly accumulating shells and plates and spicules and sclerites that are beginning to coat the seafloor in a thin layer of biological minerals. This mineralization is one of the defining features of the Cambrian, one of the things that makes it so dramatically different from the Ediacaran period that preceded it. Before the Cambrian, hard parts were rare. Almost all animal life was soft-bodied, and the fossil record of the Ediacaran is consequently sparse and difficult to read. In the Cambrian, hard parts proliferate. Animals are learning to mineralize, and the seafloor is beginning to accumulate a thin, growing deposit of the shells and tests and plates of all those mineralizing creatures. The chemistry of the water also carries phosphorus, which is the element most often limiting to biological productivity in marine systems. Phosphorus fuels the growth of phytoplankton, or rather, in this world before phytoplankton existed in their modern form, the growth of the photosynthetic bacteria and algae that do the equivalent work. Phosphorus washed from the land by rivers and delivered to the ocean sustains the primary production that the entire food web depends on, from the smallest microbial consumers at the base to the largest predators at the apex. In the Cambrian, the phosphorus cycle is robust, and the ocean is productive, producing more organic carbon per year, perhaps, than it will in some later periods when the continents are arranged differently and the upwelling patterns less favourable. You absorb some of this chemistry directly through your body wall. This is one of the beautiful simplicities of being a small, soft-bodied animal in a nutrient-rich ocean. You do not need to hunt. You do not need to wait for food to drift past and filter it out. You can, to some degree, simply exist in the water and allow the chemistry of the water to sustain you. Molecules of dissolved organic carbon, the metabolic waste products and cellular detritus of the microbial community, pass through your permeable body wall and fuel the chemical reactions that keep you alive and moving and sensing and responding. This direct uptake of dissolved organic material is a feeding strategy so ancient that it predates complex animals entirely. The single-celled organisms that dominated the ocean before the Cambrian relied on it almost exclusively, and you retain it, as a supplement to whatever other feeding strategies your body plan allows. It is, in a sense, your biological inheritance. The feeding method that your microbial ancestors used, carried forward into your new and more complex existence, still functioning, still useful, still sustaining you in the moments when more active feeding is not occurring. The silica dissolved in the Cambrian Ocean is also worth noting. Silica, silicon dioxide, the compound of silicon and oxygen that also makes up glass, is present in Cambrian seawater at higher concentrations than in modern seawater, partly because the vast communities of silica-secreting organisms that will one day remove silica from the water and incorporate it into their skeletons are not yet as well established as they will later become. Some organisms, sponges in particular, some of the oldest animal groups to have evolved, do use silica, building their skeletons from silicate spicules that are among the most elegant biological structures ever produced. And they are present in this water, those early sponges growing slowly on the seafloor in their quiet filter-feeding patience, building their intricate glassy frameworks from materials the ocean provides in abundance. There is something almost meditative about the chemistry of the ancient ocean. The way it cycles, elements dissolved from the rocks carried to the sea, incorporated into biological structures, released again by the death and decay of those structures, dissolved back into the water, incorporated again, is a rhythm so old and so persistent that it makes human civilization look like an eye blink. The ocean has been doing this for billions of years. It will continue doing it for billions more. You're a participant in that cycle, a small and soft-bodied participant, incorporating the ocean's chemistry into your tissues and eventually releasing it again in a cycle of life and death and decomposition that is as old as life itself. The water temperature at this depth, the deep Cambrian seafloor where you rest tonight, is somewhere around 5 to 10 degrees above freezing. Not quite the near-freezing temperatures of the modern deep ocean, but cool enough that the chemistry here is slower, the biological process is quieter, the metabolic demands on your body reduced to the minimum necessary for life. In this coolness, you do not need to eat very often. Your body's chemical processes tick over at their lowest speed, maintaining the essential functions, membrane integrity, nervous system activity, the slow movement of ions across cellular membranes that keeps you alive, while everything else settles into the quiet of rest. This is the chemistry of survival, the chemistry of persistence, the chemistry of a world that has spent 4 billion years building toward this moment and is now, finally, producing something complicated enough to rest in it, and perhaps, in whatever way is possible at this stage of the nervous system's evolution, to appreciate it. The water around you is not just water. It is 4 billion years of geological and biological history, expressed as a solution, and you are here, dissolved in it, part of it, resting in it. Let the thought of that dissolve too, into the water, into the dark, into sleep. You're not alone on this seafloor. You're never alone in the Cambrian Sea, and this is worth dwelling on for a moment. This fact of company, of community, of a world so populated that even in the deepest darkness, in the coldest water, in the quietest hour of the Cambrian night, you're surrounded by living things, surrounded by others who are also doing the ancient and essential work of being alive. The most numerous of your neighbours are the ones you cannot see and perhaps cannot sense at all, except as the chemical environment that they create around you, the bacteria, the archaea, The microbial communities that have been the dominant life form on this planet for 3 billion years, and that even now, even here in the Cambrian age of complex animals, vastly outnumber everything with more than one cell. They are in the water, they are in the sediment, they are in the microbial mat beneath you, and in the microbial mat several centimetres deeper, in the zones where oxygen has run out, and the chemistry of life runs on different fuels. They are eating, they are dividing, they are producing carbon dioxide and methane and sulfur compounds and oxygen and a dozen other molecules as byproducts of their metabolism, and these byproducts are what the chemistry of the Cambrian Ocean is made of. Closer to your own scale and closer to your own experience of the world, if experience is a word that can be used for a creature of your simplicity, are the other soft-bodied animals of the Cambrian seafloor. Some of them are your relatives, not close relatives, not in the way that siblings or parents are relatives, but distant relatives in the way that all life on Earth is related, connected by an unbroken chain of descent from the first cells that appeared in the ancient ocean more than 3 billion years ago. The other bilaterian animals, the ones with body plans like yours, with front ends and back ends and bilateral symmetry, are your closest companions in the evolutionary sense. Among them are the polychaete worms, or something close to the ancestral polychaetes, segmented animals that move through the sediment or across its surface with a leggy grace, their parapodia working in coordinated waves that propel them through the silt with a kind of mechanical efficiency that is beautiful in its simplicity. They are everywhere on the Cambrian seafloor, the early worms, and they will be everywhere on every seafloor that ever exists after this one, because the worm body plan, the long segmented muscular tube, is one of the most durable innovations in the history of animal life. Whatever you become, whatever your descendants become, the worms will still be there, doing what worms do, turning the sediment, moving through the silt, being, with the patient persistence that worms have made their defining characteristic. There are sponges here. The sponges may be the oldest animal group still extant. Their ancestors were filtering water and building their glassy or calcareous or spongin skeletons before the Cambrian began, perhaps for tens of millions of years before the great proliferation of animal body plans that defines this period. They sit on the seafloor in their irregular, beautiful shapes, some of them barely distinguishable from the substrate they grow on, some of them branching upward from the sediment in delicate lattices of silica spicules. They are the original filter feeders, the ones who first perfected the art of drawing water through a body and extracting its nutritional content, and they do this work tonight with the same ancient patience they have always used. The sponges do not move, or rather they move so slowly, adjusting the contraction and expansion of their tissues over hours and days, that movement in any conventional sense is not the right word for what they do. They are more like living architecture than animals in the sense that they are structures built for a specific purpose and perfectly adapted to that purpose, static in their relationship to the seafloor, but dynamic in their relationship to the water flowing through them. If you were to lie very still and watch a sponge for an hour, which in some sense you are tonight in the dark, you might see nothing. And yet it is alive, it is eating, it is growing, it is as fully present in this world as you are in its own particular and ancient way. Further away, in the slightly shallower water where the sediment gives way to rocky substrate, and the light from above, when there is light, penetrates to the bottom, there are the first echinoderms. Not the sea stars and sea urchins and brittle stars of the modern ocean, those forms are still evolving, will take millions of years to settle into the body plans that will make them familiar. But their early Cambrian ancestors, strange carpeted and stalked things that cling to the hard substrate and extend their appendages into the water column to capture passing food. They are radially symmetrical. That is, they have no front end, no back end, no preferred direction, just a circular symmetry around a central axis that gives them the same relationship to every direction simultaneously. They feel, in some way, like a different kind of answer to the question of how to be alive in the ocean. And then there are the arthropods. The arthropods are the group that will come to dominate the Cambrian Sea, in the way that dinosaurs will dominate the Mesozoic or mammals the Cenozoic. Not in size, not initially, but in abundance and diversity, and the sheer proliferating variety of their body plans. They are here tonight, the early arthropods, in many forms. There are the ancestors of the trilobites, or the trilobites themselves, in their earliest and most primitive versions, moving across the seafloor with their segmented exoskeletons and their compound eyes, which are among the earliest complex eyes in the history of life. The trilobite eye is a marvel of biological optics, hundreds or thousands of individual lenses, each one oriented slightly differently, providing a wide-angle view of the world that gives the trilobite information about its environment that simpler animals simply do not have. But the trilobites, for all their sophistication, are resting tonight too, or doing whatever the Cambrian equivalent of resting is, moving slowly along the seafloor in the dark, their compound eyes processing whatever light reaches them from the surface above, their antennae sampling the chemical composition of the water, their legs carrying them in steady, unhurried traversals of the silt. They are not hunting tonight, or at least not hunting in any way that would disturb your rest. The Cambrian is not yet the world of frenzied predation that it will briefly become in the mid-Cambrian, when an Anomalocaris stalks the water column and the evolutionary arms race between predators and prey kicks into a higher gear. Tonight, in these early hours, the threat level is low. The darkness is your protection. The cold is your protection. The stillness is your protection. And what's the question that hides in this list of neighbours, in this catalogue of soft bodies and hard shells and silica spicules and compound eyes? The question might be, what does it feel like to be surrounded by life in the dark? To rest in the centre of a community of organisms that you cannot see, that you can only sense as chemical traces in the water and vibrations in the sediment, and the occasional gentle displacement of water as something moves past you in the night. Perhaps it feels like this, like lying in a field at night and knowing, without seeing, that the field is full of crickets and moths and nightjars and the small rustlings of things that prefer the dark hours for their business. Like being part of something larger than yourself, in the way that any individual member of a community is part of something larger, not lonely, not isolated, simply present in the midst of a world that is getting on with its business, quietly and persistently, all around you. The Cambrian seafloor at night is full of life that you cannot see and that mostly cannot see you. And in that fullness, in that invisible community of creatures all doing their own particular version of being alive, there is a kind of comfort. The world is not empty. The world has never been empty, not really, not since life first appeared in these ancient waters. It has been inhabited. It has been attended to in whatever way living things attend to the world they are part of, and you are one more attendant resting here in the dark, part of the ancient and continuing conversation between life and the ocean it was born in. Let the awareness of that company settle over you. You're not alone in this ancient sea. You have never been alone. Sleep in the company of the Cambrian, and let the quiet sounds of its deep and populated night carry you further toward rest. Something is happening in the Cambrian that is so profound, so consequential, so transformative of the nature of experience itself, that it deserves to be considered slowly and carefully, the way you might consider something that changes everything. Eyes are being invented, or rather, eyes are evolving, because no single creature sits down one day and invents eyes the way an engineer might design a new machine. Eyes emerge gradually through the slow accumulation of mutations and selection pressures over millions of generations, in a process that has no designer and no direction and no goal, except the one imposed by the fact that creatures with better vision survive more often and leave more descendants than creatures with worse vision. But the end result, when you look at the compound eye of a trilobite in its fully developed form, when you look at the sophisticated visual apparatus that Anomalocaris will develop, when you consider the variety of different eye designs that emerge in the Cambrian across multiple independent lineages, the end result looks very much like a series of inventions. It looks like the ocean discovering sight. Before eyes, the world that animals could perceive was chemically rich, but spatially imprecise. You could follow a gradient toward food or away from a chemical that your nervous system associated with danger, but you could not see the food or the danger across any distance. You could not know what was coming until it was very close. The world existed only as a radius of chemical information around your body, a sphere of detectability that extended perhaps a centimetre or two into the water in all directions. Eyes changed this. Eyes extended the radius of perception across distances that must have seemed, if Cambrian animals could be said to seem anything, almost unimaginably vast. A compound eye capable of detecting motion across its entire visual field simultaneously could perceive a predator or a prey item meters away. could perceive a change in light that indicated the presence of a solid obstacle, could, in the most sophisticated versions that will develop in the mid-Cambrian, form something approaching an image of the world, a spatial map of where things are and how they are moving. The first eyes were almost certainly not eyes in the full sense. They were patches of photoreceptive cells, cells that contained molecules called opsins that changed their shape when they absorbed photons of light. These shape changes triggered chemical cascades that produced electrical signals in the nervous system. The creature that had these photoreceptive cells knew something it had not known before. There was light here, or there was darkness. The light was brighter in this direction than in that one. Something was blocking the light that had been there before. This is not vision as you experience it, but it is the beginning of vision. And in the context of a world in which no animal had any directional sensitivity to light at all, it was a revolution. It meant that the world above, the water column, the surface, the sky with its changing light, was now accessible as information. An animal could know, for the first time, that it was in a shadow, that something was between it and the light, that the light was dimming, perhaps because the sun was setting, or because a cloud had passed, or because a large creature was swimming overhead. The evolution of eyes in the Cambrian was not a single event. It happened multiple times, independently, in multiple lineages, which tells you something important about how powerful the advantage of vision is. In the language of evolutionary biology, eyes evolved independently perhaps 40 or more times in different animal groups, each time starting from the same basic building blocks, the opsin proteins and the photoreceptive cells, but arriving at different optical solutions, the compound eye of arthropods, the camera eye of cephalopods and vertebrates, the mirror eye of certain marine invertebrates, the simple pit eyes of early worms. In the Cambrian specifically, the arthropods seem to have led the way. Trilobites, those beautifully segmented creatures that will dominate the Cambrian seafloor for millions of years, and leave behind some of the most abundant and most perfectly preserved fossils in the geological record, developed compound eyes early and developed them well. The trilobite eye is not a simple thing. It is a sophisticated optical instrument built from calcite crystals, the same mineral as limestone, that have been precisely oriented so that they minimize optical distortion and maximize the clarity of the image formed by each individual lens. Calcite is not a material that you would intuitively choose for building a lens because most crystals are birefringent. They split light into two beams. But trilobites found the precise crystallographic orientation of calcite that avoids this problem, and they built their lenses from that orientation with a consistency that tells you this was a genuine biological adaptation, not an accident. The trilobites that are resting on the seafloor around you tonight may or may not be capable of seeing you in the dark. Their compound eyes are sensitive to light, but in the deep water of the Cambrian seafloor at midnight, with the surface far above and the moon's light attenuated to nothing. By the time it filters down through hundreds of meters of water, there may simply not be enough light for their eyes to be useful. In the dark, they rely on the same chemical senses that you do, on the sampling of water chemistry by their antennae, on the vibration of the sediment transmitted through their legs, on the chemical gradients that tell them where food is and where danger might be. And yet their eyes are there, waiting for the light, ready for the moment when the sun rises above the surface of the Cambrian Sea and the world of the shallows becomes a visual feast. The light flickering through the water in shifting patterns, the shadows of other animals moving across the bright patches of seafloor, the complex, beautiful, dangerous world of the Cambrian swimming around them in full colour and motion and detail. That world exists during the day. But tonight is night, and in the night, even the compound eyes of the trilobites are at rest. You do not have compound eyes. Your visual apparatus, if you have one at all, is much simpler. You may have eye spots, simple clusters of photoreceptive cells that can distinguish light from dark, but that cannot form images. Or you may have no visual apparatus at all, navigating your world entirely through chemical senses and the mechanical sense of water pressure and vibration. In the dark of the Cambrian night, it does not matter much. In the dark, the elaborate optical instruments of the trilobites and the simple eye spots of the more primitive creatures are equally useless, and the world reduces itself to chemistry and pressure, the ancient senses that preceded vision by billions of years. But the eyes exist. They are being invented all around you in this ancient sea by dozens of different lineages pursuing dozens of different optical solutions to the same fundamental problem. And the world that those eyes will build, the visual world, the world of colour and motion and distance and depth that becomes possible once complex imaging systems have evolved, that world is coming. It is already in its first draft. It is already changing the nature of what it means to be an animal in the Cambrian Sea. You rest in the darkness in the time before the visual world has fully arrived. The water is chemistry, the seafloor is texture, the night is the absence of light, and you are here, in the midst of the invention of seeing, resting in the last of the ancient darkness that was all the world there was before eyes appeared. What would it mean to see this world, if you could? The thought arrives softly. Set it aside. The darkness is comfortable. The darkness is home. Close whatever you have in place of eyes, and let the Cambrian night continue its ancient, unseeing business all around you. There is something in this world that you should know about. Not because it threatens you tonight. It does not, or at least not directly, not here in the cold, deep water where you rest in the undisturbed dark, but because it is one of the most important things that is happening in the Cambrian Sea, one of the most consequential developments in the entire history of animal life. Something in this ocean has learned to hunt. Before the Cambrian, or very close to the beginning of it, predation as a biological strategy did not meaningfully exist. Animals fed on microbes, on dissolved organic matter, on algae and bacteria that did not resist being consumed. The food did not flee. The food did not defend itself. The food simply was, in its bacterial or algal or dissolved organic carbon form, and the animals consumed it in the patient way that filter feeders and absorbers consume the chemical richness of the ocean. There was no chase, there was no contest. There was no moment when one animal decided, in whatever rudimentary neurological way the word decided can be applied to creatures of this complexity, to pursue another animal. Something changed. Exactly when and in what lineage is still debated, and will continue to be debated in the paleontological literature for as long as human beings are interested in asking such questions. But the evidence in the Cambrian fossil record is unambiguous. By the early Cambrian, something is eating other animals. Bite marks appear in fossils. Small shelly fauna show signs of having been attacked. The morphology of some Cambrian creatures, the shells, the spines, the defensive postures, makes no sense except as responses to predation. Something in the Cambrian Sea has crossed the threshold from consuming passive food to pursuing active prey. The most famous of the Cambrian predators, the creature that will eventually become the icon of Cambrian predation in the popular imagination, is Anomalocaris. This is a name you do not know yet, in the sense that you do not know any names, but let the description of it settle into your awareness as a piece of information about the world you inhabit. Anomalocaris is large by the standards of the Cambrian Sea, very large. Some specimens will eventually grow to a metre in length, which in a world where most animals are measured in millimetres or centimetres, makes it something like a colossus. It is an arthropod, or something very close to an arthropod. Its exact taxonomic position is still being refined, with a streamlined body and paired fins along its sides that undulate in waves to propel it through the water with a smooth, gliding efficiency. Its front appendages are perhaps the most remarkable feature. Paired, segmented spinose, armed with spines that can close together like a cage to grasp prey, they extend in front of its body and move with a precision that implies a nervous system capable of coordinated, purposeful action. Anomalocaris can reach out with these appendages and grab things. It can hold them. It can bring them toward its mouth, which is circular, ringed with hard plates that can crush or shred whatever is brought to them. This creature is not simply filtering water. It is hunting. It is catching. It is killing and consuming individual animals, one at a time, with a directedness that represents something genuinely new in the history of life. The eyes of Anomalocaris are extraordinary. They are compound eyes, like the trilobite eyes mentioned earlier, but larger and mounted on stalks that give them a wide field of view, and they are among the most sophisticated visual organs of the Cambrian period. In the shallower, lighter waters where Anomalocaris most often hunts, these eyes can form detailed images of the world around the creature. They can track moving prey. They can distinguish the shapes of trilobites and soft-bodied worms and small arthropods against the background of the seafloor. They are predators' eyes, optimized not for the detection of light and dark, but for the precise spatial perception that successful pursuit hunting requires. You are not in Anomalocaris' immediate territory tonight. The deep water where you rest is not its preferred hunting ground. It prefers the shallower, better-lit zones where its eyes are most useful and its prey most abundant. And the Cambrian is not yet, in this early phase, the world of relentless predation that it will become as the period develops. The arms race between predator and prey, the rapid evolution of shells and spines and defensive behaviors in prey species in response to the evolution of better hunting capabilities in predators, is just beginning. The pressure is there, but it has not yet reached the intensity that will drive the rapid morphological innovation of the mid-Cambrian. But the existence of Anomalocaris, even at a distance, even as a presence that you sense only as a vague chemical trace in the currents of the deeper water, represents something important for you. It is the reason that your body plan, that bilateral symmetry, that front end and back end, that ability to move with purpose, matters. In a world without predators, a creature that cannot move is not necessarily at a disadvantage. The Ediacaran fauna, many of them, were essentially immobile, and they flourished in their sessile way for millions of years before the Cambrian began. But in a world with predators, the ability to detect threat and move away from it, quickly, decisively in the direction your front end indicates, is the difference between living and dying. Your body, in other words, is partly a response to this threat. Not in the sense that your body was designed with Anomalocaris in mind. Evolution does not work by anticipating threats, but by selecting for responses to current conditions. But in the deeper sense that the evolutionary pressures that shaped bilateral animals like you were partly the pressures of predation. The nervous system that gives you the ability to detect and respond to chemical danger gradients is useful in many contexts, but the selection pressure for a faster, more integrated nervous system, for something that can respond to threat in milliseconds rather than minutes, comes from the possibility of being eaten. This is perhaps a paradox worth resting with for a moment, in the quiet of the Cambrian night. The thing that makes you sophisticated, the nervous system, the directional body plan, the ability to move with intention, is partly the product of danger. The Cambrian explosion of animal forms is in part an arms race. Predation drove the evolution of defense, and defense drove the evolution of better predation, and the result was a rapidly escalating complexity of body forms and behaviors and sensory systems that transformed the ocean in a geological eye blink from a world of passive filter feeders to a world of hunters and hunted. But tonight is not a night for arms races. Tonight, Anomalocaris is elsewhere, in the shallower water perhaps, hunting in the last light of a day that has now given way to darkness, or settled somewhere in its own version of rest. The water is cold and deep and still. The chemical sensors that your nervous system relies on are reading nothing alarming. The currents are steady. The microbial mat beneath you is undisturbed. The community of soft-bodied animals and early arthropods that surrounds you on this stretch of Cambrian seafloor is going about its quiet nocturnal business without urgency. You are safe. Not permanently, not absolutely, not in the way that safety will exist in some future imagined world. But tonight, in this particular water, at this particular depth, in this particular hour of the Cambrian night, you are safe. Your chemical senses confirm it with every passing moment. The world around you is quiet. The nearest significant threat is far enough away that it exists only as an abstract possibility, not as an immediate chemical signal of danger. The safety of the deep water, the safety of the dark, the safety of being small and soft and uninteresting to the predators that are just beginning to learn what it means to hunt. This is the architecture of your survival on this particular night, and it is enough. It is more than enough. Settle deeper into the silt. The Cambrian night will protect you. It has been protecting you all evening, and it will continue to do so until morning brings its light to the surface far above. Rest in the knowledge of that safety. Let it be the last thought before the thoughts dissolve into the deeper water of sleep. If you are still drifting in the Cambrian Sea, still feeling the cold water and the soft silt and the ancient quiet of this extraordinary world, thank you for being here with us through the night. If this story is helping you rest, please subscribe so the next prehistoric night is waiting for you when you return. There are so many more ancient worlds to visit together. Now let us go deeper still into the Cambrian darkness. Above you, between where you rest and the surface of the Cambrian Sea, there is a column of water that is as full of life and activity as any environment on Earth. It is not visible to you from here. Nothing is visible to you from here, not in the darkness of the deep water. But it exists, this column of living water, stretching from your position on the seafloor all the way up to the place where the ocean meets the air, where the Cambrian sky begins and the sea ends. The water column of the Cambrian is stratified, not abruptly, not in the way that a layer cake is stratified, but gradually with properties that shift as you move from the surface downward. Near the surface, the water is warmer. The sunlight, when it is present, which tonight it is not, but during the day it most certainly is, warms the upper layers, creating a thermocline, a gradient of temperature that separates the warm surface water from the cold water below. The warm surface water is also richer in oxygen, because it is in direct contact with the atmosphere, and the oxygen from the atmosphere dissolves readily into the warm, churning upper layers of the sea. It is in these upper layers, in the sunlit zone near the surface, that most of the ocean's primary production occurs. Primary production, the conversion of sunlight and carbon dioxide and water into organic carbon through photosynthesis, is the foundation of the food web, the process that captures energy from the sun and packages it into a form that every other organism in the ocean depends on. In the Cambrian Sea, primary production is carried out primarily by the cyanobacteria and green algae that float in the surface waters, harvesting the light that penetrates the upper meters of the sea and building it into the molecular structures of their cells. These photosynthetic organisms are tiny, microscopic most of them, but they are present in the Cambrian Ocean in such astronomical quantities, millions per milliliter of surface water, that together they represent an enormous total biomass. They are the base of everything. Every animal in the Cambrian Sea, from the smallest filter-feeding worm to the largest hunting arthropod, is ultimately sustained by the work of these microscopic photosynthesizers, by the carbon they fix and the oxygen they release, and the cells they build from the materials the ocean provides. And when the photosynthesizers die, which they do constantly in the enormous cycling of microbial life, their cells sink. The death of plankton in the surface waters is not simply death. It is the beginning of a slow rain of organic material that descends through the water column from the surface to the seafloor. The marine biologists of a much later time will call this the biological pump, or the marine snow, a constant, gentle downward drift of organic particles, dead cells and fecal pellets and mucus threads, and the shed shells of tiny planktonic organisms, all slowly settling toward the bottom. You have been sustained by this rain, or rather, your kind has been sustained by it. The soft-bodied animals of the Cambrian seafloor are in large part detritivories and deposit feeders, creatures that extract nutrition from the organic material that accumulates in the sediment as the marine snow settles. The silt beneath you is full of this material, packed with it, layered with it, the product of millions of years of biological rain from above. The microbial mat that covers the sediment surface is itself built largely from the decomposition of this settled material, from the bacterial processing of dead organic matter into the chemical forms that living organisms can use. In the middle water, somewhere between the warm sunlit surface and the cold dark bottom where you rest, there is a zone of activity that is neither the brilliant productivity of the surface nor the quiet decomposition of the bottom. It is the midwater, and in the Cambrian it is inhabited by creatures that spend their entire lives suspended in the water column, neither touching the surface nor settling to the seafloor. Some of them are small, drifting with the currents, filtering the particles that drift past them. Others are larger, capable of directed swimming, the early relatives of jellyfish perhaps, or the planktonic larvae of bottom-dwelling animals, or the free-swimming stages of organisms that will eventually settle and become sessile. The jellyfish, or the creatures that will eventually be recognized as the ancestors of jellyfish, are extraordinary presences in the Cambrian water column. They are transparent, nearly invisible in the water, catching the light only at their edges, shimmering slightly as they pulse their way through the ocean in the slow, rhythmic contractions that propel them. They have no brains, no specialized sense organs, no bilateral symmetry. They are radially symmetrical, and they drift and pulse through the water in their ancient and beautiful way, trailing tentacles that capture whatever small creature or organic particle drifts into them. Jellyfish-like organisms, medusozoans to use the technical term, are among the oldest animal groups, with some fossil evidence suggesting they predate the Cambrian by a significant margin. They have survived every mass extinction in the history of life, in some form, and they will be present in the oceans of the far future as surely as they are present in the Cambrian. They are the survivors, the persisters, the ones who found a design so functional, so energy efficient, so adaptable to the variability of the ocean, that they have never needed to change it in any fundamental way. Above the jellyfish, near the surface, the Cambrian Sea at night is dark and relatively still. The waves that disturb the surface, generated by the wind that crosses the Cambrian Ocean, the same wind driven by the same differential heating of the Earth's surface that drives wind today, roll and crash at the surface in the Cambrian dark, but this turbulence penetrates only a short distance below the surface before the water returns to its characteristic calm. And in the calm just below the surface, in the dark of the Cambrian night, there is a community of small creatures doing the same thing that you are doing, resting, waiting, conserving energy through the long hours of darkness. Some of the Cambrian's plankton are capable of something called diel vertical migration, the daily movement up toward the surface as night falls and down toward the deeper water as the sun rises. In the dark, they rise toward the food-rich surface waters, where they feed on the photosynthetic organisms that have been busy all day converting sunlight into organic matter. As dawn approaches, they sink again, back into the darker, safer water below the zone where visual predators can see them. This migration is not unique to the Cambrian. It is a behaviour that will persist in ocean plankton for the next 500 million years, but it is new enough in this period that it has not yet reached the scale and complexity that it will eventually achieve. The Cambrian water column at night, then, is a place of movement and stillness, of feeding and resting, of the constant cycling of organic matter between the sunlit surface and the dark bottom that sustains the entire community of organisms, from the smallest bacterium to the largest predator. It is full of creatures you cannot see from here. It is full of processes you cannot sense. It is full of the ancient, ongoing, tireless business of the ocean sustaining life. And all of it, the marine snow settling from the surface, the midwater plankton pulsing through the dark, the bacterial communities cycling nutrients in the sediment, all of it is ultimately what sustains you. You're the bottom of the water column, the place where the settling ends and the decomposition begins, the place where organic matter is processed and the minerals are released back to the water to be carried upward again and used again in the endless cycle that the ocean runs without interruption. You are part of the cycle, not just a witness to it, not just a creature resting in its path, but a participant. Your body incorporates the organic matter that settles from above. Your metabolism processes it. Your own eventual death will release it back to the sediment, where other organisms will process it in turn. The cycle continues through you. You are made of it, and to it you will return. This is not a sad thought. In the Cambrian, and in most of the natural world, there is no sadness in the cycle. There is only the cycle, turning as it has always turned, as it will always turn, the slow chemical conversation between the living and the dead that keeps the ocean and the earth in a kind of balance. You rest in the middle of that conversation. It continues all around you, calmly, without urgency, in the deep and ancient dark. Not far from where you rest, perhaps a few body lengths away on the same stretch of Cambrian seafloor, perhaps close enough that the water displaced by its occasional small movements reaches you as a faint pressure wave. There is a trilobite. It is one of the most important animals in the Cambrian Sea, though it does not know this and would not know it even if it had the cognitive capacity for such self-assessment, which it does not. It simply is. A trilobite, resting on the seafloor of an ancient ocean in the deep hours of the night, its compound eyes temporarily useless in the darkness, its antennae sampling the water chemistry, with the patient persistence of an instrument left running. The trilobite is beautiful. This is perhaps an odd thing to say about an extinct arthropod that lived 500 million years ago, and whose existence is now known only through the fossils it left in sedimentary rock. But it is true in the straightforward way that many things in nature are beautiful, not because they have been designed to appeal to human aesthetic sensibilities, but because they are the product of a long refinement process that tends, in organisms that survive, to produce a kind of functional elegance. The trilobite is functionally elegant. It is perfectly adapted to the life it lives, and the perfection of that adaptation gives it a kind of beauty that does not require eyes to appreciate. It is segmented. This is the first and most important thing to understand about a trilobite's body plan. The body is divided lengthwise by 2 furrows into 3 lobes, the left pleural lobe, the axial lobe down the centre, and the right pleural lobe, which is the origin of the name trilobite, from the Greek for 3-lobed. And the body is divided crosswise into 3 regions. The cephalon at the front, which is where the eyes and antennae are, and which is covered by a hard semicircular shield. The thorax in the middle, which is made up of multiple articulated segments that can flex and curl, and the pygidium at the back, which is another fused shield. This segmentation gives the trilobite something remarkable: the ability to curl. When threatened, or at least when whatever the trilobite's nervous system interprets as a threat reaches a certain threshold, the trilobite can curl its body so that the cephalon and the pygidium meet, enclosing the soft, vulnerable underparts of the animal inside a sphere of hard calcite armour. This enrolled position, which has been found in trilobite fossils preserved in the moment of their death, is a defensive posture that the trilobite presumably adopts when danger is near. It is one of the earliest examples of a behavioural defence response in the animal fossil record. The trilobite near you is not enrolled tonight. It is in its normal resting position, the cephalon facing forward, the thorax and pygidium spread flat against the sediment. Its antennae, which extend from the front of the cephalon and are long enough to sample the water chemistry several centimetres ahead of the body, are moving slightly in the current. Small movements, barely perceptible, just the constant automatic sampling that the trilobite's nervous system runs even in the deepest rest, because a nervous system that stops monitoring the environment completely is a nervous system that might miss the approach of something it needs to respond to quickly. The compound eyes of the trilobite are open because trilobites have no eyelids. They cannot close their eyes. The eyes are always open, always available, oriented slightly to the sides and upward, so that the trilobite's visual field covers most of the hemisphere above and around it. But in the darkness of the Cambrian deep water at midnight, the eyes see nothing. The photoreceptors in the individual lenses are registering only the faint scattered photons that reach even the darkest water, not enough to form an image, barely enough to distinguish between night and less deep night. The eyes are functionally resting, waiting for light, open and ready but doing nothing. What does a trilobite think about, if it thinks about anything at all? This is a question without an answer, and perhaps without meaning. The trilobite's nervous system is organised around survival, around the detection of food and danger, and the coordination of the locomotion that allows it to pursue or flee. There is probably no interior monologue. There is probably no experience of the night as a period to be endured until morning. There is simply the ongoing chemical monitoring, the muscle tone that holds the body in its resting position against the gentle current, the slow metabolic processes of a creature that has reduced its activity to the minimum necessary for survival through the hours of darkness. And yet there is something that deserves to be called experience in the trilobite's nervous system, even if it is far simpler than anything you might recognise as experience. When the antennae register a change in water chemistry, the approach of food, perhaps, something changes in the trilobite's internal state. Something shifts in the activity of the neural circuits that govern its behaviour. It is not thinking about food in the way that you might think about food, but it is, in some chemical and electrical sense, responding to the possibility of food. It is already beginning to prepare, at the neural level, the behavioural response that food presence will eventually trigger. This preparation, this not quite anticipation that happens in the nervous systems of even simple animals, is the beginning of something that will, over millions of years and in much more complex nervous systems, eventually become experience, as the word is usually meant. Every nervous system, from the simplest to the most complex, is a system for maintaining an internal model of the external world and using that model to guide behaviour. The trilobite's internal model is very simple, but it is a model. It is the universe beginning to represent itself, to build internal copies of external reality, to use those copies to predict what will happen and how to respond. The trilobite is not thinking, but it is modelling. And in that modelling, however simple, however crude, however far from the richness of conscious experience, there is the beginning of something that will eventually produce minds capable of looking back at it and wondering about it. The trilobite rests on the Cambrian seafloor and models its world, and somewhere in that modelling is the seed of the capacity that allows you, 500 million years later, to imagine it doing so. The sounds that reach the trilobite, through vibration in the sediment and pressure waves in the water, are the sounds of the Cambrian night. There is no sound in the Cambrian Sea the way there is sound in the ocean today, with the songs of whales travelling thousands of kilometres through the deep water and the clicking of dolphins and the grinding of coral reefs. The Cambrian is quieter than that. But it is not silent. There are sounds, the soft shifting of sediment, the occasional impact of a settling organic particle, the pressure waves generated by the movement of other animals through the water, the chemical sounds, if chemical information can be called sound, that the antennae are always receiving and translating. To the trilobite, these sounds mean nothing unusual. The chemical composition of the water is within normal parameters. The vibrations in the sediment are the ordinary vibrations of the inhabited but undisturbed seafloor. Nothing is approaching from any direction that the antennae can detect. The world is, in every way that the trilobite's sensory apparatus can assess, ordinary and safe. The neural circuits that govern the trilobite's alarm responses remain quiet. The behavioural programs that would drive flight or enrolment remain dormant. The trilobite continues to rest, its antennae moving in their slow automatic sampling, its eyes open and seeing nothing, its muscles holding their quiet tension against the current. You and the trilobite rest together on the Cambrian seafloor. You are different kinds of creatures with different body plans and different evolutionary histories and different sensory worlds. But you share this: the darkness, the cold water, the soft silt beneath you, the slow chemical monitoring of the world while the active business of the day is suspended. You share the night. You share the rest. In whatever way it is possible for creatures of the Cambrian to share anything, you share this moment. Let the thought of that companionship settle over you like the marine snow settling from above, slowly, continuously, adding particle by particle to the accumulation of rest. The Cambrian period is sometimes called the Cambrian explosion. This is a name that can be misleading, because in the context of ordinary human experience, an explosion is a sudden, violent, destructive event that lasts a fraction of a second and leaves behind only wreckage. The Cambrian explosion was not like that. It lasted tens of millions of years. It was not destructive but creative, or rather, it was creative in the way that all evolution is creative, through the generation of variation and the selection of what works. It was not sudden in any ordinary sense. It was sudden only relative to the 4 billion years that came before it, and the 500 million years that came after. What happened in the Cambrian was this: the diversity of animal body plans expanded from a very small number to something close to the full range that has existed in the animal kingdom ever since. Before the Cambrian, there were soft-bodied organisms with a limited variety of body plans. After the Cambrian, or rather after the Cambrian had run its course, which took about 50 million years, virtually every major body plan in the animal kingdom was established. The arthropods, with their segmented bodies and jointed legs and hard exoskeletons, the mollusks with their shells and their mantles, the echinoderms with their radial symmetry and their water vascular systems, the chordates with their notochords and their dorsal nerve cords, the group that will eventually produce the vertebrates and eventually you. This is the great experiment, the testing of body plans, the rapid exploration of the space of possible animal architectures through millions of generations of variation and selection to find out which designs work well enough in the conditions of the Cambrian Sea to survive and reproduce and diversify further. Not all of them will pass the test. Some of the most extraordinary creatures of the Cambrian, the ones that will eventually become the most famous, precisely because they are so strange, will leave no descendants at all. They will be experiments that ran for a few million years and then ended, their lineages erased from the living world by whatever combination of competition and environmental change and simple bad luck determines the fate of species in the Cambrian. But the ones that survive will be the foundation of everything. The chordates will survive in their early worm-like forms, and from them will come the vertebrates, and from the vertebrates will come the fish, and from the fish will come the amphibians, and from the amphibians will come the reptiles, and from the reptiles will come the mammals, and from the mammals will come, eventually, a species that will build cities and write music and look at fossils and wonder about the sea, in which all of it began. The arthropods will survive, and from them will come the insects and the spiders and the crabs and the shrimp, and 10 million other species that will fill every habitat on Earth. The mollusks will survive, and from them will come the squid, and the octopus, and the nautilus, and the clam and the snail. You are part of this experiment. You are one of the test cases. Your body plan, whatever it is being tested against the conditions of the Cambrian Sea, and the question being asked is, does this work well enough? Is this design adequate to the demands of this world? Can it find enough food? Can it avoid enough danger? Can it reproduce often enough to keep the lineage going? These are the questions that evolution is asking, in the only way it knows how to ask questions, by running the experiment and seeing what survives. The extraordinary thing about the Cambrian is not just that so many different body plans appeared, but how quickly they appeared relative to the history of life before them. For 3 billion years, the basic architecture of life had remained essentially constant. Cells, membranes, metabolic machinery, genetic code. The innovations of those 3 billion years were mostly invisible to the fossil record, mostly happening at the molecular level, mostly concerned with the chemistry of life rather than the shapes that life builds. And then, in a relatively short window of geological time, the shapes proliferated. The macroscopic world of biology suddenly became enormously varied, enormously experimental, enormously rich. Some researchers have suggested that this explosion was driven partly by the physical properties of the Cambrian Ocean, the specific chemistry of the water, the distribution of nutrients, the oxygen levels, and partly by the evolutionary dynamics of an ecosystem that was essentially empty of large, complex animals, and therefore offered almost unlimited opportunities for new designs to fill unoccupied niches. In an ecosystem that is already fully occupied, the evolution of a new body plan faces enormous competition. Every niche is already taken by something that has been refined by millions of years of selection for exactly that niche. But in the Cambrian, many niches were newly available, and the animals that evolved to fill them faced relatively little competition from other complex animals. This is the ecological opportunity argument for the Cambrian explosion, and it has considerable force. The Cambrian Sea was, in many ways, a world of empty niches waiting to be filled. The predator niche was new, and the animals that evolved to fill it, Anomalocaris and its relatives, faced no significant competition from other large-bodied predators because large-bodied predators had not yet evolved. The filter-feeding niche in the water column was available to any animal that could evolve the right body plan to exploit it. The deposit-feeding niche in the sediment was open to any animal that could burrow. The hard substrate grazing niche was available. The pelagic hunting niche was available. And the animals of the Cambrian filled these niches with a creativity that is genuinely astonishing when you look at the fossil record. The Burgess Shale in what is now British Columbia, Canada, and the Chengjiang Biota in Yunnan Province in China are two of the most important fossil deposits in the world precisely because they preserve soft-bodied animals from the Cambrian in extraordinary detail. Not just the shells and hard parts that usually survive fossilization, but the impressions of soft tissues, the shapes of eyes and guts and appendages that would normally be lost to the decay process. And what these deposits reveal is a world of animals so strange, so diverse, so apparently experimental in their design, that paleontologists spent decades arguing about how to classify them. There is a creature called Opabinia, which has 5 eyes arranged across the top of its head and a single grasping appendage at the front of its body that ends in a claw and that it presumably used to seize prey. There is Hallucigenia, which was originally reconstructed upside down because its body plan is so unlike anything living that the paleontologists who first described it could not determine which side was the top. There is Wiwaxia, a slug-like creature covered in overlapping sclerites, hard defensive plates, and rows of tall spines, which browsed the Cambrian seafloor on its soft underside while its armour protected it from above. There is Nectocaris, which may or may not be an early cephalopod depending on whose interpretation of the fossil you accept. These are your contemporaries, or near contemporaries, These extraordinary, strange experimental animals are the inhabitants of the same ocean you are resting in tonight, or oceans very much like it in time and character. They are part of the experiment, and some of them will survive and leave descendants, and their descendants will diversify and eventually fill the earth, and others will end here, in this ancient sea, their lineages stopping without continuation. You do not know which category you're in. You cannot know. The Cambrian is the beginning, and the beginning, by definition, does not know its own ending. All you know, in whatever way you know anything, is that you are here, in the cold, dark water, on the soft silt of a seafloor that has been preparing for you for billions of years. You are part of the experiment. You are one of the answers to the question that the Cambrian is asking. The experiment continues all around you, even in the night, even in the rest. The metabolic processes of your body are running, maintaining, repairing, preparing for the next day's demands. Your genetic material, the encoded instructions for your particular design, is being copied and maintained with the fidelity that the chemistry of DNA requires, ready to be passed on when the time comes. You are, even in sleep, an ongoing experiment in the question of what life can be. And the answer so far is this soft-bodied creature resting in the dark, this particular solution to the problem of being alive in the Cambrian Sea, this quiet presence in the middle of the most creative period in the history of the animal kingdom. You are enough. You have always been enough. The experiment says so. There is something happening inside you right now that is happening for the first time, or nearly the first time, in the history of life on this planet. Your nervous system is doing what nervous systems do in the quiet hours, in the reduced activity of rest. It is settling into a lower register. The signals that it sends and receives are fewer and slower. The behavioral commands that it issues to your muscles are minimal. The gentle maintenance of body position against the current, the slow continuation of whatever minimal feeding activity you engage in even while otherwise at rest. The ongoing monitoring of your chemical environment for changes that require a more urgent response. But the nervous system is not off. A nervous system, even a simple one, is never entirely off. It is a system that runs on the electrical gradient between the inside and outside of nerve cells, on the flow of ions across membranes, on the continuous activity of biochemical processes that do not pause because the environment has temporarily become quiet. Even in the deepest rest, the nervous system maintains itself. It maintains the conditions for its own activity, the ion gradients, the neurotransmitter levels, the structural integrity of the neural circuits. And it runs, at the minimum level necessary for life, the processes that constitute the experience of being alive. In you, the nervous system is simpler than in almost any animal that will ever live on this earth in the future. There is no brain in the sense that vertebrates will eventually develop brains, no concentrated mass of neural tissue specialized for the integration of complex information from multiple sensory modalities. There is instead a distributed network. Nerve cells arranged in ganglia, small clusters that control specific regions or functions, connected by nerve fibers that carry signals between the ganglia and between the ganglia and the sensory organs and muscles they serve. This distributed nervous system is an ancient design, older than bilateral animals, present in some form in the earliest multicellular organisms that had nervous systems at all. The cnidarians, the jellyfish and their relatives, have nerve nets, diffuse networks of neurons distributed throughout the body without any clear centralization, responding to stimuli by conducting electrical activity in all directions at once, producing the simple, slow, coordinated contractions that are the jellyfish's locomotion. Your nervous system, while more organized than a cnidarian nerve net, more centralized, with a clearer distinction between sensory, interneuron and motor components, retains something of that distributed quality. And this distribution has a beauty to it. A centralized brain, when it is damaged, can cause catastrophic loss of function. Because everything depends on it, any damage to it has outsized consequences. A distributed nervous system is more resilient. Damage to one part can be compensated for by the rest of the network, at least partially. The system continues to function even when locally disrupted. It is not an optimal design for the kind of rapid, complex information processing that large brains will eventually enable, but it is a robust design, a reliable design, a design that can survive the physical insults of life in a world that does not always treat its inhabitants gently. Right now, in the quiet of the Cambrian night, your nervous system is doing something that is, in its rudimentary way, what sleep is. The activity level is low, the sensory thresholds are elevated, meaning that it takes a stronger stimulus to produce a behavioural response than it would during your more active periods. The motor programs that govern your active behaviours are largely inhibited, and the metabolic processes of your neural tissue are quietly performing whatever maintenance and restoration functions nervous systems require. Whether this constitutes sleep in the way the word will eventually be used, whether there is a circadian rhythm governing your activity, whether there are distinct sleep states, whether the neural activity during your rest periods has the kind of organised structure that will eventually be recognised as REM sleep in mammals, none of this can be known with any confidence. The fossil record does not preserve the electrical activity of ancient neurons. The biology of sleep in the earliest animals is one of the most difficult questions in evolutionary biology, precisely because the very features of sleep that can be most clearly studied, its neural correlates, its behavioural expressions, its homeostatic regulation, are not accessible in the historical record. But something is happening. The evidence from even very simple modern animals suggests that rest states with something like sleep's functions, the restoration of neural function, the consolidation of whatever simple learning has occurred during the active period, the maintenance of the neural machinery for the next day's demands, are very ancient. Even jellyfish, which have about as simple a nervous system as any animal with a nervous system, show behavioural rest states that share some properties with sleep. Even Hydra, a small sea cnidarian with an extraordinarily simple organisation, shows sleep-like states. If the nervous system, any nervous system, has needs that are better served by rest than by activity, then something like sleep probably evolved very early in the history of nervous systems. What is your nervous system learning in the Cambrian day? What are the experiences of your active hours that your resting nervous system is, in whatever limited way it can, processing and storing? The chemical traces of the food you found, perhaps, or the food you did not find. The sensation of the current shifting, the faint chemical signal of a larger animal moving through the water above, the texture of different patches of sediment. None of these are experiences in the rich sense. They are not memories in the sense that you will carry them explicitly into the future and consciously recall them, but they may leave traces in the adjustment of your behavioural tendencies, in the slight modification of the thresholds at which you respond to various stimuli, in the very slow and simple form of learning that even primitive nervous systems are capable of. You are, in this sense, the first learner, or among the first learners, the first animals in the history of the Earth whose interactions with their environment left traces in a biological structure capable of modifying future behaviour. This is not a small thing. The capacity for learning, for modifying behaviour based on experience, is the capacity that will eventually produce language, culture, science, music, mathematics. Every form of human knowledge ultimately traces back to the capacity of nervous systems to modify themselves in response to experience, to carry the past into the future in a form that can guide the present. And here, in the Cambrian midnight, that capacity exists in its simplest form, in you, in the small modifications of your neural thresholds that the day's experiences have produced, in the tiny, unconscious, automatic learning that your simple nervous system has been doing in the background of every interaction with the world around you. It is nothing like human learning. It is probably nothing like the learning of a fish or a bird or a mammal. But it is something. It is the beginning of something. Your nervous system rests in the quiet dark and performs its maintenance. The ion pumps in your nerve cell membranes work steadily to restore the ion gradients that the day's activity has dissipated. The chemical levels of your neurotransmitters are being replenished. The structural proteins that maintain the architecture of your neural circuits are being synthesized and deployed. The whole system is, in the quiet biological sense of the word, healing, restoring itself to the state from which it can do its best work. This is what sleep does, fundamentally. It restores the capacity for wakefulness. It is not an absence, but a preparation. And in you, in this ancient, simple, soft-bodied creature of the Cambrian Sea, the process is occurring for among the first times in the history of animal life. The first nervous system is resting, healing, preparing. And somewhere in that preparation, in that quiet biological renewal, is the remote and unlikely and therefore somehow all the more moving ancestor of every thought that has ever been thought. Dawn is coming. Not now. The night is still deep, still complete, still the total darkness of the Cambrian deep water with no light reaching down from above. But it is coming. The Cambrian sun. A sun slightly younger than the sun of your own time, burning with the energy of a slightly smaller hydrogen reserve, but otherwise largely indistinguishable in its character and its effects, is on the other side of the Earth right now, below the horizon of the Cambrian sky. And it is rising. Slowly. The way the sun always rises, because the Earth has been turning at roughly this speed for billions of years, and will continue to turn at roughly this speed for billions more. The Cambrian day, when it comes, will be a day that looks both familiar and strange. The sky is blue. The same Rayleigh scattering of sunlight that makes the sky blue today made it blue in the Cambrian, because the atmosphere's basic composition is by now not so different from what it will become. But the sky is also different in ways that would be hard to articulate but impossible to miss. The clouds are different, formed in a different temperature regime, under a different atmospheric circulation. The light quality is slightly different, the sun a slightly different colour, or the atmosphere a slightly different transparency, producing hues that exist nowhere in the modern world. And the silence. The Cambrian sky above the sea is silent in a way that no sky above the Earth has been for the last 360 million years. There are no birds. There will be no birds for hundreds of millions of years. The sky above the Cambrian Sea is occupied by nothing larger than insects, and insects have not yet evolved either. It is a sky as empty of life as the sky over the ocean in a deep storm. Empty, except for the clouds and the light and the wind. But in the sea below, when the dawn light begins to filter down through the surface, the effect will be remarkable. The Cambrian Sea at dawn is not the dark and still place it is at midnight. It is a place that comes alive with the light, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that a room comes alive when you gradually turn up a dimmer switch. First, the water above you lightens from absolute black to a deep blue-black, then to a dark blue. Then, as the sun climbs above the horizon, and its light penetrates deeper, to a blue that is actually visible. A faint, beautiful, ancient blue that has been the colour of seawater in sunlight since long before any eye evolved to see it. The creatures of the water column respond to this light. The planktonic animals that spent the night in the safer dark of the deeper water begin their upward migration, moving toward the surface and its bounty of photosynthetically produced organic matter. The trilobites near you begin to stir, their compound eyes registering the increasing light, their behavioural programs that associate light with activity beginning to overcome the rest state inhibition of the night. They will move again when the light is sufficient. They will hunt, or graze, or do whatever their particular feeding strategy requires, and they will use their extraordinary eyes to do it. And you? When the light comes, what will you do? Perhaps you will stir too, responding to whatever your sensory system registers about the changing conditions. Perhaps you will begin to move more actively, following chemical gradients with slightly more urgency than the passive drift of the night. Perhaps you will feed more actively, taking advantage of the organic particles that settle through the water column in slightly higher concentrations during the day as the surface plankton are more active and productive. But that is the day, and the day is still hours away. For now, the darkness is still your world. The cold silt beneath you is still undisturbed. The current still moves through your chemoreceptors with its steady report of nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing requiring response. The Cambrian night is holding. It will hold for some hours more, and in those hours there is nothing required of you. Not movement, not feeding, not the chemical monitoring that is your most constant activity. Not anything except this, the simple, ancient, animal rest that you're already doing. Think for a moment, if thinking is the right word for whatever process is occurring in your simple nervous system, about what the light means, about what dawn means in a world where eyes are new and vision is only just beginning to transform the relationship between animals and their environment. For most of the history of life on Earth, dawn meant nothing. The single-celled organisms that dominated the ocean for 3 billion years were responsive to light. Some of them, the photosynthetic ones, moved toward it. The sensitive ones perhaps moved away from it if it was too intense. But there was no animal for whom the coming of light was an event in the experiential sense. For you, in the Cambrian, dawn is beginning to mean something. It is beginning to be associated with changes in the chemical composition of the water, with the products of photosynthesis that begin to accumulate when the light reaches the photosynthetic organisms near the surface. It is beginning to be associated with the increased activity of other animals, the changes in water pressure and vibration that accompany the awakening of the Cambrian community in the morning light. Your nervous system, such as it is, has learned, or is learning over the generations that your lineage has existed, to associate certain light-related cues with the transition from rest to activity. This association between light and waking is so ancient, so deeply embedded in the biology of almost all complex animals, that it will persist for 500 million years in virtually unbroken form. The circadian rhythms that govern the sleep-wake cycles of modern animals, including the human animal reading or listening to this story right now, are ultimately derived from the same basic light-sensing machinery that is beginning to shape your behavior in the Cambrian, the opsin proteins in your photoreceptive cells, the chemical cascades they initiate when light strikes them, the behavioral programs that result. These are the ancestors of the molecular machinery that will eventually cause a modern human to feel sleepy when the light dims and alert when the light brightens. You are part of that long history too. Your simple response to the light, whatever it is, however much or little it resembles what a human would experience as the awareness of a new day, is the beginning of the billion-year story of how light has shaped the behavior of animals. The Cambrian sun rises on an ocean that is learning slowly that sunlight matters, that the rhythm of light and dark is meaningful, that the day and the night are different kinds of time that call for different kinds of behavior. But not yet. Not for these last quiet hours. The night is still here, still doing what the night does, holding the world in its dark and quiet containment, allowing the things that rest to rest a little longer, allowing the things that need restoration to continue their restoration undisturbed. The light will come, and when it comes you will know it, in whatever way you know things. But for now, the night continues. Let yourself rest in the continued darkness. The light is coming. It is always coming on this turning planet, but it is not here yet. And in the not yet of the Cambrian night, in this last long stretch of darkness before the ancient sun rises over an ancient sea, there is still time. There is always, always still time. The world was patient for 4 billion years before you arrived. It can be patient a little longer while you sleep. The night is long, the silt is soft, the water is cold and perfect and holds you without effort, without judgment, without expectation. Rest a little more. The dawn will announce itself when it is ready. There is a lineage. There is always a lineage. Life does not appear from nowhere. It descends always from something that was alive before it, in an unbroken chain of cellular inheritance that extends back to the first cells in the ancient ocean more than 3 billion years ago. And you, this soft-bodied creature resting on the Cambrian seafloor in the deep hours of the night, are a link in that chain. A particular link, in a particular position, carrying within you the accumulated inheritance of everything that came before, and holding within your genetic material the potential for everything that will come after. What did you inherit? What did the long history of life on Earth give to you in the 4 billion years of biological work that preceded your existence? The answer is almost everything. Almost everything that you are. The chemistry of your cells, the structure of your DNA, the basic metabolic machinery that converts food into energy, the proteins that build your body and carry out the chemical reactions that constitute your life. All of it is inherited. All of it was working before you were born, in your parents and your grandparents and your ancestors back through uncountable generations to the first cells that developed these systems. The cell itself is an inheritance, the lipid bilayer membrane that separates your cell interiors from the exterior environment, that creates the chemical boundary inside which life happens, that allows cells to maintain a different chemistry inside than outside. This membrane design was worked out in the earliest period of life's history, more than 3 billion years ago, and it has not changed in its fundamental character since then. Every living thing on Earth, from the simplest bacterium to the most complex mammal, uses the same basic membrane design. It is perhaps the most conserved structure in the history of life. The genetic code is an inheritance. The specific mapping of 3 nucleotide sequences to amino acids, the code that allows the information in DNA to be translated into the proteins that do the work of the cell, is the same in you as it is in the bacteria living in the sediment beneath you, and the archaea living in the hydrothermal vents on the far side of the ocean basin, and the photosynthetic organisms floating in the sunlit water far above. The code was established early, perhaps before 2 billion years ago, and it has remained essentially unchanged ever since because any change in the code would require simultaneous changes to every protein in every cell, a task so impossibly difficult that it is effectively irreversible. The metabolic pathways are an inheritance. Glycolysis, the splitting of glucose molecules to release energy, is a process so ancient and so fundamental that it operates in virtually every living thing on Earth in essentially the same form, using essentially the same enzymes, producing the same products. It was working in the first cells. It is working in you tonight, converting the organic molecules you have accumulated through feeding into the ATP that your cells use as their universal currency of energy. It will be working in every living thing on Earth for as long as life exists. What did you contribute? What is new in you that did not exist before the Cambrian animals appeared? The answer, here, is more exciting. What is new in you is the organization, the way these ancient inherited cellular components are arranged and coordinated and specialized to produce an animal, a multicellular organism with differentiated tissues, with a nervous system, with muscles, with a body plan that has direction and purpose, and the ability to move through the world with intention. This organization is the Cambrian's contribution to the history of life. This is what the Cambrian explosion exploded with: organizational innovation. The discovery, through evolution, through the blind testing of variation, of new ways to arrange the ancient cellular machinery into new and more complex structures. Your muscles are a Cambrian achievement, or close to it. Muscle cells specialized for the rapid contraction that produces movement, are not a feature of single-celled life. They are a feature of complex multicellular animals, and their evolution, and the evolution of the nervous systems that control them, is part of what defines the Cambrian revolution in biology. Before muscles, movement was possible. Single cells move, and the ediacaran soft-bodied organisms could move in their slow and undirected way, but the precise, rapid, coordinated movement that muscles enable is something genuinely new. Your nervous system is a Cambrian achievement. The coordination of multiple muscle groups to produce directed locomotion, the integration of sensory information from multiple receptors to guide that locomotion, the simple decision-making that allows you to respond differently to different chemical gradients. These are capabilities that require a nervous system, and the nervous system is an innovation of the animal kingdom, an organizational achievement that the single-celled world did not and could not produce. It required multicellularity and differentiation, and the evolution of cells specialized for electrical signaling, and the organization of those cells into networks capable of producing coordinated behavior. And your body plan is a Cambrian achievement, perhaps the most profound of all. The bilateral symmetry, the front end and back end, the distinction between dorsal and ventral surfaces, the segmentation that allows modular variation of structure along the body's length. These are the architectural innovations of the bilaterian animals, and they are innovations that will prove so useful, so adaptable, so extensible across the space of possible body plans and ecological niches, that virtually every large, complex, mobile animal on Earth for the next 500 million years will build on them. You inherited the cellular machinery of 3 billion years of microbial life. You contributed the organizational innovations of the animal kingdom, and together, the ancient inheritance and the recent innovation, they produce you, resting here on the Cambrian seafloor in the cold and the dark, a creature of sufficient complexity that the question of what you experience might actually have a non-trivial answer. What will you pass on? What is the inheritance that your descendants will carry forward from this moment? You cannot know any more than you can know which of the Cambrians' experimental body plans will survive and which will end. But the possibilities are extraordinary. Your lineage might produce over the next few million years the first vertebrates, the creatures with internal bony skeletons that will eventually give rise to all the fish and amphibians and reptiles and mammals. Or your lineage might produce something else entirely, something that will occupy its own particular niche in the exploding diversity of the Cambrian Sea and its successors. Or your lineage might end, as so many Cambrian lineages will end, without descendants, without continuation, without a trace in the living world except what the fossil record happens to have preserved. This, too, is part of the inheritance. The Cambrian is not only a period of creation, it is also a period of extinction, of the ending of experiments that did not produce the right combination of features for the conditions they faced. The lineages that end in the Cambrian are not failures, not in any meaningful sense. They were part of the experiment. They were part of the great testing of biological possibility that the Cambrian represents. Their contribution was the negative space, the body plans that did not work, the strategies that were not sustainable, the designs that were outcompeted. And negative space, in art and in evolution, is as important as what is present. But these are thoughts for the daylight, for the active mind, for the creature engaged with the world and its demands. Tonight, in the darkness, none of this is required. You do not need to understand your inheritance or your contribution, or your lineage's fate. You only need to be here, in the cold water, on the silt, in the quiet that the Cambrian night provides so generously. The inheritance is carried in your cells, doing its work whether you think about it or not. The future will unfold as it will unfold, whether or not you are aware of the direction it is moving. For now, the only thing required is rest. And rest is what you are doing. Deeply, in the Cambrian way, the simple, chemical, cellular rest that is the most ancient form of restoration. The cells restore themselves. The ion gradients are replenished. The metabolic processes tick over at their minimum rate. The nervous system runs its quiet maintenance routines. And you, this link in the chain of life, this particular arrangement of ancient cellular machinery in a new and Cambrian form, you rest in the deep, cold, generous darkness of an ocean that was here before you, and will be here long after, and that holds you tonight as it holds all the other lives that rest within it, without judgment, without preference, without the need for anything except continuation. Let us travel forward for a moment. Not far, not to the present, but just far enough to see where this night leads. Just far enough to hold the thread of continuity that runs from this cold, dark, ancient seafloor to the world that will eventually grow from it. Because there is a thread. Because the Cambrian Sea and the modern world are connected by an unbroken biological chain, and following that chain, even briefly, even incompletely, is one of the most extraordinary journeys it is possible to take. From the Cambrian, the animal kingdom diversifies. The arthropods that are your neighbours tonight will become the dominant animal group on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. The trilobites ruling the seas of the Paleozoic, the early insects colonising the first forests, the spiders and scorpions and millipedes filling every niche that opens as the land is colonised. They will survive mass extinctions, adapt to every environment the Earth has ever offered, and eventually comprise more than 80% of all animal species on the modern Earth. The insects alone, descendants of the early terrestrial arthropods that will not evolve for another 100 million years or more, will number somewhere between 1 and 10 quintillion individuals at any given moment. The arthropods are not going anywhere. The lineage that will give rise to the vertebrates, the chordates, the animals with notochords and dorsal nerve cords, will persist through the Cambrian and emerge from it as small fish-like creatures swimming in the Ordovician seas. By the Devonian period, 380 million years from now, those fish-like creatures will have given rise to the first jawed fish, and from jawed fish to the first bony fish, and from bony fish to the lobe-finned fish that will eventually crawl onto land, and from those fish to the tetrapods, the four-limbed vertebrates, and from the tetrapods to the amphibians and the reptiles and eventually the mammals. The mammals will be small and quiet for most of the Mesozoic, living in the shadows and the night hours while the dinosaurs dominate the daylight world. They will wait, in their patient mammalian way, for 66 million years. And then the asteroid will come, an asteroid that no living thing can anticipate or prevent, and it will end the non-avian dinosaurs and open the world to the mammals in a way that would not otherwise have been possible. The mammals will fill the vacated niches with extraordinary speed, by geological standards, diversifying in the 10 million years after the extinction into the ancestors of every mammal alive today. And from those diversifying mammals eventually, 55 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs, 44 million years before the present, the primates will emerge. And from the primates, after another long and wandering evolutionary journey through forests and savannas and ice ages and the slow remodelling of skulls and hands and social structures, will come the hominins. And from the hominins, very recently, So recently that in geological time it is barely distinguishable from now, will come the species that invented language and built cities and composed music, and began to wonder, with increasing earnestness and sophistication, where they came from and why. That species, in some version of itself that you cannot imagine from here, is listening to this story. That species found the fossils. It chipped them from the rock and cleaned them in the lab and put them under microscopes, and ran them through synchrotrons and debated their taxonomy and their phylogenetics and their paleoecology. That species looked at the trace fossils in the Cambrian rock, the faint lines pressed into ancient silt by creatures very much like you, and understood, with a sudden and profound recognition, that the lines were made by an animal, by something with muscles and a nervous system and a front end and a back end, by something that moved through the world with intention. And that species felt something when they understood this. Not the cold professional satisfaction of a scientific result confirmed, though they felt that too, but something warmer and stranger and harder to name, something like recognition, something like the feeling you have when you look at a very old photograph of someone you have never met, but who shares your nose or your hands or your particular way of holding their head, and you understand, without needing to be told, that this person is part of you. The trilobite fossil is part of you. The trace fossil of the burrowing worm in the Cambrian sediment is part of you. The impression left by a soft-bodied bilaterian creature in the silt of an ancient seafloor, the outline of a body like yours, left 540 million years ago in the cold dark water of an ocean that has long since vanished, is part of you. You are part of the chain. You are an indispensable link in the chain, because without you, or without something like you, nothing that comes after you would exist. The chain runs through you. The 500 million year thread of biological continuity runs through the soft body resting on this Cambrian seafloor tonight. This is the deepest truth of the history of life on Earth. It is continuous. Not in the sense that nothing changes. Everything changes constantly, ceaselessly, in the random and directed ways that evolution produces change, but continuous in the sense that life has never been interrupted. The thread has never been broken. From the first cell to the last complex organism that will ever live on this planet, there is an unbroken chain of cellular descent, of genetic inheritance, of biological continuity that spans the entire history of the living Earth. You are part of that chain, resting here in the Cambrian dark, not a beginning and not an end, just a link that is doing what links do, connecting what came before to what will come after, holding the chain, carrying the inheritance forward in the only way that biological inheritance can be carried forward, by staying alive long enough to reproduce, by passing on the information encoded in your DNA to another generation of small, soft-bodied bilateral creatures in the Cambrian Sea. You have been doing this for your entire existence. Your parents did it before you, and their parents before them, and on back through every generation that the history of life on Earth contains. And your descendants, if you have them, if the experiment of your particular lineage continues, will do it after you. The chain will continue. The thread will hold. From this Cambrian night, 500 million years of quiet are being built. Not a literal quiet. The world will be noisy in many periods that follow, with the sounds of creatures that have not yet evolved. The creak of forests, the calls of birds, the thunder of stampeding dinosaurs, the wind through grasslands, the crash of waves on beaches where the footprints of walking animals mark the sand. But quiet in the sense that the universe is mostly quiet, mostly patient, mostly content to let time pass without demanding that it mean something. The 500 million years that will follow this night will simply happen, as they have always simply happened, one day at a time, one generation at a time, one fossil layer at a time. And at the far end of those 500 million years, there is tonight. There is this story, being told to you in a world that looks nothing like the Cambrian Sea, and yet is made of everything the Cambrian Sea produced. There is you, listening. Or perhaps no longer quite listening. Perhaps already drifting toward the sleep that this story is designed to invite, in a world that is the direct descendant of the world you're imagining yourself resting in. The Cambrian Sea is in you. The inheritance of those first nervous systems, those first soft bodies, those first bilateral creatures resting in the cold dark water. It is in you. It is in the ion channels of your neurons and the bilateral symmetry of your body, and the circadian rhythms that are already beginning to tell you that the night is deep and rest is appropriate and morning can wait. There is so much to say about the silt, you might not expect this. Silt seems, in the abstract, like the simplest possible subject. Fine particles of sediment, grey and undifferentiated, the background against which the real action of the Cambrian Sea takes place. But the silt is not background. The silt is itself a world, a complex and layered and chemically rich world, and you are resting on its surface right now, and it deserves to be understood. The silt beneath you is made of several things at once. It is partly the physical weathering products of continental rock, tiny particles of quartz and feldspar and clay minerals, eroded from the ancient cratons by rain and wind and the freeze-thaw cycles of higher elevations, carried to the sea by rivers, and deposited here over millions of years of steady accumulation. These mineral particles are inert, or nearly so. They are the skeleton of the sediment, the mineral framework on which the biological chemistry of the seafloor operates. But the silt is not only mineral, it is also biological. It is full of the remains of organisms, the dead cells of the bacteria and algae that lived and died in the water column above, settling through the water as marine snow and accumulating in the sediment over millennia. It is full of the organic molecules released by the decomposition of those cells, the amino acids and sugars and fatty acids and aromatic compounds that constitute the chemical food source for the sediment-dwelling community. It is full, in its deeper layers, of the compressed and chemically altered remains of everything that has ever lived in or near this part of the ancient ocean. The texture of the silt under your body is distinctive. It is fine, very fine, finer than sand, fine enough that individual particles are below the threshold of any sensory organ you possess to detect individually. What you feel, if feel is the right word, is a surface that yields slightly under your weight, that compresses a small distance and then supports you, that has a softness that is not the softness of something weak, but the softness of something that has settled and compacted under its own weight over many years and is now in a stable equilibrium. The surface of the microbial mat, the thin layer of photosynthetic and heterotrophic bacteria, and their secreted extracellular material that covers the top of the mineral silt, is even softer. It has a slightly adhesive quality, produced by the biofilms that the bacteria secrete, the polysaccharide gels that help them adhere to the substrate and to each other, and that create the cohesive structure of the mat. If you move across this surface, the mat gives way slightly, and then springs back, in the way that living biological material springs back, not as a rigid floor springs back, but as something that is itself alive and resilient. Below the surface of the mat, the chemistry changes rapidly with depth. The mat is stratified, as noted before, with photosynthetic organisms at the top and sulfate-reducing and other anaerobic organisms in the deeper layers. The transition from oxygenated to anoxic conditions happens across a depth of perhaps a few millimeters that represent chemically and biologically the difference between two entirely different worlds. Above the transition, the chemistry of oxygen, of aerobic metabolism, of the high-energy reactions that complex animals like you depend on. Below it, the chemistry of sulfur, of fermentation, of the ancient and slow metabolic pathways that life used before oxygen became available. This chemical stratification of the sediment is one of the most fundamental features of marine sediment ecology, and it has been present in this form for much longer than the Cambrian. The microbial mats of the Proterozoic, the 2 billion year period before the Cambrian, had the same stratification, the same sharp chemical transition, from oxygenated to anoxic conditions across a very small depth. What the Cambrian added was the bioturbation, the physical mixing of these layers by burrowing animals, that begins to blur the sharp stratification and alter the chemistry of the sediment in ways that have permanent consequences for the global biogeochemical cycles. You feel the mat beneath you, and the mat feels you. This is not metaphor, and the mat literally registers your presence. Your weight compresses the mat slightly. Your metabolic processes consume dissolved oxygen from the water at the mat's surface, creating a tiny local depletion that the diffusion of oxygen from the surrounding water must work to fill. The bacteria in the mat nearest to your body may respond to your chemical presence, to the compounds released by your metabolism, the the carbon dioxide and the organic molecules that your cellular processes produce by altering their own activity. The relationship between you and the mat is not one of complete indifference. You affect each other in small ways simply by being in proximity. The sediment below the mat contains history. Pressed into its layers, compacted by the weight of all the sediment deposited above it year after year for thousands of years, are the traces of every organism that has lived in or on this patch of seafloor for as long as this patch of seafloor has been here. Burrows made by worms that lived here decades or centuries ago, now filled with sediment of a slightly different composition than the surrounding matrix. The impressions of organisms that settled and died on this spot, their soft tissues long since decomposed and their mineral contents dissolved back into the water, but their outlines still preserved in the slight density difference between the sediment that filled their place and the sediment that surrounded them. These are the proto-fossils. The sediment around you is already in the process of becoming the rock record of the Cambrian, the geological archive that will eventually be lifted by tectonic processes and exposed at the surface of future mountains and cliffs and quarries, and chipped out by human beings with small hammers, and studied with microscopes and particle accelerators, and gradually understood as the record of a world almost incomprehensibly remote in time. But that future is very far away. Right now, the sediment is just sediment. Soft and grey and chemically complex and biologically active, and full of the quiet work of decomposition and mineral cycling that has been going on here since the seafloor was first deposited. The worms that left those old burrows are long dead. But new worms are alive tonight, somewhere in the sediment around you, doing the same work that those old worms did. The cycle continues. The mat grows. The sediment accumulates. The chemistry cycles. And you rest on the surface of it all, a temporary presence on a substrate that is far older than you and will outlast you by millions of years. There is something deeply restful about the silt, not in a romantic or sentimental way. The silt is not comfortable in the way that a bed is comfortable, not designed for comfort, not soft in the way that softness is usually desired. But it has a quality of permanence, of geological patience, that the rest of the Cambrian world, with its bustling chemistry and its proliferating body plans and its evolutionary experiments, does not quite have. The silt simply is. It has been here longer than any animal. It will be here long after. It does not hurry. It does not compete. It accumulates, particle by particle, in the slow and steady way that geological time accumulates, and it provides the foundation on which all the biological activity of the Cambrian seafloor happens. You're resting on that foundation. You are held by it. The most ancient thing in the Cambrian Sea, older than the animals, older than the microbial mat, older than the Cambrian itself, is the mineral sediment beneath you, and it is holding you tonight as it holds everything that comes to rest on it, in the ancient and geological and completely unhurried way that only rock and silt can hold. Let that holding be the thing you feel as you continue to drift towards sleep. The ancient silt, patient and permanent, the biological mat, soft and living, your body, resting in the space between the geological and the biological, in the exact place where the mineral world and the living world meet. You are at the boundary. You are, in some sense, the boundary, the living surface on the ancient floor, and the boundary is where everything interesting happens. But tonight, even the interesting things are quiet. Even the boundary is at rest. Among the creatures of the Cambrian Sea, there are some that will leave no descendants. They are here tonight, perhaps, in the water around you or on the seafloor nearby, alive, feeding, going about their Cambrian business, and yet their lineages will end before the Cambrian period is over, or shortly after, and nothing alive in the modern world will carry their genetic heritage forward. They are the experiments that did not continue, the designs that were tested and found insufficient, or found sufficient only for a window of geological time that has now closed. There is a creature called Opabenia. You may feel something like it passing through the water nearby, a soft body perhaps 20 centimetres long, propelled by a series of lateral lobes that flex in waves to push it through the water. Its most remarkable feature, the one that makes its fossil so striking when you look at it for the first time, is the arrangement of its eyes. 5 of them, not 2, not compound eyes arranged in a single wide-angle system like the trilobites, but 5 distinct eyes arranged across the top of its head, pointing upward and to the sides and providing what must have been an extraordinary panoramic view of the water above and around it. And from the front of its head extends a long flexible proboscis, ending in a grasping claw, which it presumably used to seize small prey and bring them back to a mouth that faces backward, opening toward the underside of the body. This design, 5 eyes and a forward-reaching grasping limb and a backward-facing mouth, is not a design that any living animal uses. There is no modern creature that combines these features, no lineage that survived from the Cambrian carrying the Opabinia body plan forward. When Opabinia's lineage ended, it ended completely. Whatever advantages those 5 eyes provided, whatever efficiency the grasping proboscis gave in capturing prey, none of it was enough to sustain the lineage through the end of the Cambrian and into the Ordovician and beyond. Something about the world that came after was not compatible with what Opabinia had become. There is another creature, Hallucigenia, that lives in the Cambrian Sea in a form that will be so confusing to the paleontologists who find its fossils hundreds of millions of years from now that they will reconstruct it upside down for decades before realizing their error. Hallucigenia walks on pairs of rigid spines that it uses as legs, or rather, what will be interpreted as legs for a long time before the correct orientation is established. On its back, or what turns out to be its back, it bears soft tentacles that may have been used for feeding. Its head is small and, when finally correctly identified, bears a simple mouth and small eyes. It lives in the sediment or close to it, doing whatever Hallucigenia does in its particular corner of the Cambrian. What is Hallucigenia? Taxonomically, it is now understood to be an early Lobopodian, related to the lineage that will give rise to the velvet worms and the arthropods, and so it is not quite as isolated from the modern world as Opabinia. But its specific form, its particular combination of spines and tentacles and small body, is not a form that has any living representative. The hallucigenids as a specific group did not survive, only their broader lineage did, transformed through millions of generations of evolution into forms that bear little obvious resemblance to the creature moving somewhere in the Cambrian sediment tonight. Wiwaxia is another, a slug-like creature that browses the microbial mat on a soft muscular foot while wearing a coat of hard overlapping sclerites, protective plates, and standing a forest of tall spines from its back that deter predators from approaching from above. The sclerates are made from the same calcium-rich chemistry that the rest of the Cambrian's hard parts revolution draws on, and they are mineralized with a precision that speaks to a long evolutionary history of being eaten and the corresponding evolutionary pressure to develop effective armor. Wiwaxia is successful within the Cambrian context. It survives long enough to leave abundant fossils in the Burgess Shale, but its lineage too will eventually close. Why? Why do some lineages survive and others end? This is one of the most difficult questions in evolutionary biology, and the honest answer is that we cannot always know. Sometimes the reason seems clear in retrospect. A body plan that was suited to a particular set of environmental conditions that changed. A lineage that lost out in competition with a better adapted competitor. A group that lacked the flexibility to respond to an extinction event with enough surviving members in the right places. But often the reason is not clear, or the evidence for any particular explanation is insufficient, or the question is complicated by the incompleteness of the fossil record. What we can say is this. The end of a lineage is not a moral judgment. It is not evidence that the lineage was bad or wrong or inadequate in some absolute sense. Opabinia's 5 eyes and grasping proboscis were good solutions, good enough to support the lineage for millions of years, good enough to produce abundant fossils in some of the best preserved windows into the Cambrian. But they were solutions to a particular set of problems in a particular Cambrian world, and when that world changed, as the world always changes, those solutions were no longer the most effective available. There is a kind of elegy in thinking about the lineages that ended. Not because ending is inherently sad, the universe is indifferent to endings, and the organisms themselves had no awareness of their lineage's fate, but because the diversity they represented is now inaccessible. The body plan of Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and its strange proboscis and whatever nervous system it used to coordinate them, is gone. Whatever it was like to be Opabinia, whatever it experienced, if experience is the right word, in its Cambrian world, is gone, the information is lost. The living presence that those 5 eyes represented, looking out at the Cambrian Sea from their extraordinary vantage points on the top of that distinctive head, no longer exists anywhere in the world. And yet the fact that they existed, and exist now as fossils, and exist as images and reconstructions and descriptions that scientists have spent careers trying to get right, that is not nothing. The existence of Opabinia has left a mark on the world, a small but real mark, in the form of the rock that preserves its impression, and the human knowledge that has been built around that impression. In some very attenuated sense, Opabinia is still here, still part of the ongoing story of the Cambrian Sea and what it was and what it meant and what it produced. You're resting in the same water that Opabinia swam through. Not exactly the same water. Water molecules move, the ocean is not a static thing. Each particular collection of water molecules is somewhere different from where it was yesterday. But the same ocean, the same chemical composition roughly, the same darkness tonight, the same Cambrian Sea that holds all of these extraordinary experimental creatures together in one shared ecological moment, before the selective pressures and the extinction events of the future sort them into survivors and those who did not continue. You do not know yet which you are. None of them know. The Cambrian Sea does not know. The only thing that knows the answer to that question is time, and time is not in the habit of revealing what it knows before the moment of revelation arrives. So rest in the not knowing. Rest in the shared present of the Cambrian night, in which all the experiments are still running, and all the lineages are still alive, and the ocean is full of the extraordinary variety of its moment. Opabinia, and Hallucigenia, and Wiwaxia, and the trilobites and you, all of you, resting or moving or feeding in the dark of the same ancient sea. All of you equally alive tonight. All of you equally part of what the Cambrian is. The diversity is extraordinary. The darkness is complete. The water holds all of it in its cold and perfect patience. And somewhere in the sediment, the slow work of preservation is already beginning. Already in this very night, pressing the shapes of the living world into the raw material that will eventually become the fossil record. Long after the lineages have ended, the shapes will remain. The silt remembers everything. Water has a sound. Even still water, even the deepest and most undisturbed water, has a sound. Or rather, carries within it the sounds that travel through it, the vibrations produced by all the moving and settling and living things that exist in the ocean and at its boundaries. Sound travels through water differently than it travels through air. It travels faster, about 4.5 times faster, and it attenuates more slowly, meaning that sounds produced at a distance can travel much farther through water before fading to inaudibility. The ocean is not a silent world. Even in the deepest, darkest, most apparently still stretches of deep water there is sound. What sounds does the Cambrian Sea make? This is a question that can only be answered approximately, from inference and comparison, because no recording was ever made of the Cambrian Ocean, and no recording will ever be possible. But we can think about the sources of sound in the Cambrian world and estimate what the underwater acoustic environment might have been like in a period before the great sound makers of the modern ocean had evolved. The loudest sounds in the Cambrian Ocean are geological. The processes that build and destroy the seafloor, the volcanoes, the hydrothermal vents, the settling and compaction of sediment, are among the most energetic producers of sound in the ocean, and they produce sounds at frequencies so low that they are felt as much as heard, transmitted through the water and the seafloor as very long wavelength pressure waves. A hydrothermal vent somewhere below you. There are always hydrothermal vents somewhere below you in the Cambrian. The seafloor is geologically young and volcanically active, emits a low, constant rumble of bubbling and cracking, and the movement of superheated water through fractured rock. This sound is not frightening. It is simply the background against which all the other sounds of the Cambrian Sea occur. It is so constant and so low frequency that your primitive sensory apparatus may not register it as something separate from the baseline state of the world. It is simply part of what the ocean is, the way the low hum of a building's ventilation system is part of what a building is, present, continuous, below the threshold of conscious attention, felt rather than heard. The next loudest sounds are the sounds of the surface. Where the ocean meets the air, waves are generated by the wind, and those waves carry energy that propagates downward into the water as pressure fluctuations. Even here at the bottom, there is a faint signature of the surface weather in the acoustic background. A broad spectrum noise that varies with sea state, louder when the surface is rough and quieter when the Cambrian wind is calm. Tonight, the sea state above is probably moderate. Not stormy, but not glassy either. The normal condition for an open ocean in the Cambrian. The surface noise filters down to you as a very faint broadband whisper, too quiet and too diffuse to direct your attention to any particular location, just part of the oceanic background. And then there are the biological sounds. This is where the Cambrian differs most dramatically from the modern ocean. In the modern ocean, the biological soundscape is extraordinary. Whales singing across entire ocean basins, fish drumming their swim bladders in courtship choruses, snapping shrimp creating a constant crackle in shallow water, dolphins echolocating, sea lions barking. The modern ocean is full of biological noise. The Cambrian is much quieter. The animals of the Cambrian have not yet invented biological sound production in any systematic way. They are not singing to attract mates. They are not calling to warn others of predators. They are not echolocating to find prey. These capabilities, which will develop in the various animal groups over the next hundreds of millions of years, require nervous systems and anatomical structures that have not yet evolved. The Cambrian animals are, in the acoustic sense, largely passive. They move through the water and their movement creates pressure waves, but they do not create sound intentionally. The sounds you can sense in the Cambrian water tonight are therefore mostly mechanical. The small pressure waves created by the movement of other animals through the water around you, the settling of sediment particles as they drift to the bottom, the occasional crack or click produced by the hardened exoskeleton of a trilobite flexing as it moves. These are not sounds in the rich biological sense. They are mechanical signatures of physical events, registered by the vibration-sensitive cells in your body wall and processed by your nervous system as information about the physical state of the water around you. There is something beautiful about this acoustic simplicity. The modern ocean is acoustically complex, rich with signals and noise, a constant electromagnetic and acoustic environment that requires sophisticated processing systems to make sense of. The Cambrian Ocean is acoustically clean. What you hear in your simple mechanical way is a faithful report of what is physically happening in the water around you. No deception, no complexity, no layer upon layer of signals to sort through. The water moves because something moved it. The pressure changes because something changed it. The mechanical simplicity of the Cambrian acoustic world mirrors the mechanical simplicity of the Cambrian nervous system. And what do these sounds tell you tonight? They tell you nothing unusual. The pressure waves reaching you from all directions are the ordinary pressure waves of an undisturbed Cambrian deep water environment. No large animal is moving toward you. You would feel the bow wave, the pressure pushed ahead of a large moving body, before you could sense the animal in any other way. No significant geological event is occurring nearby. The hydrothermal background is steady, not spiking with the signature of a sudden seismic event. The surface weather, as far as you can tell from the faint signature of its noise filtering down to you, is unremarkable. The acoustic world around you is saying what the chemical world is also saying, what the mechanical world of water pressure and current is saying. The Cambrian night is ordinary, safe, undisturbed. The particular patch of Cambrian seafloor on which you rest is one of the many millions of similar patches that together make up the floor of this ancient ocean, and on this particular night, this particular patch is quiet. The geological machinery is running its slow operations far away. The surface weather is doing its moderate thing high above. The animals of the Cambrian are mostly resting or moving quietly, producing only the gentle mechanical sounds of ordinary biological life. If you have any ability to register sound, and perhaps you do, in the most rudimentary way, through vibration-sensitive cells in your body wall, then what you are registering right now is a lullaby. Not a human lullaby, not a melody or a rhythm, not something that any ear would recognize as music, but something that functions, in the context of your Cambrian existence, as a lullaby functions, a confirmation that the world is quiet and safe and continuing on in its ordinary way, and that there is no reason now for anything other than rest. The ancient water sings its mechanical lullaby, The hydrothermal vents provide their bass note. The surface weather provides its high whisper. The biological world provides its occasional clicks and pressure waves, and you rest in the middle of it, your vibration-sensitive cells confirming moment by moment that the world is exactly as it should be, that the night is ordinary, that sleep is appropriate and safe and the best possible response to the current state of things. Listen, if you can, to the sound of the ancient water. Let it be the sound of rest, the sound of a world that has been here for billions of years and will be here for billions more, doing its quiet work, asking nothing of you tonight except that you lie still and let it continue. There is a weight that the Cambrian Sea does not feel, that none of its creatures feel, that the world cannot feel in any period before the one that is capable of imagining time. It is the weight of the future, the accumulated mass of everything that will happen next, all the periods and extinctions and evolutionary radiations and geological upheavals, and the slow drift of continents, and the waxing and waning of ice ages and the rise and fall of innumerable species across 500 million years. All of that is coming, all of it is implicit in the chemistry and the biology of the Cambrian moment, but none of it is present yet. None of it has weight yet. None of it has happened. And because none of it has happened, the Cambrian Sea is, in a very real sense, free of it. The trilobites resting nearby do not carry the knowledge that their kind will persist for 270 million years and then vanish completely in the Permian extinction. They do not know about the Permian extinction. The Permian extinction does not exist yet. They simply are, in the comfortable way that creatures are when they are not burdened by the knowledge of their own history. This is not a small thing. The freedom from the future, the inability to anticipate what is coming, to fear the extinction, to mourn the species that will be lost, is one of the ways in which the Cambrian animals are simpler than you in the most enviable sense. They cannot be sad about what will happen to them. They cannot be anxious about the evolutionary arms race that is just beginning. They cannot worry about whether their body plan will prove adequate to the conditions of the Ordovician or the Silurian or the Devonian. They simply exist in the present moment of the Cambrian Sea, doing what the Cambrian Sea requires of them, and that is enough. You tonight can be the same, not because you lack the nervous complexity to imagine the future, you probably do lack it in the Cambrian sense, but because tonight invites you to inhabit the Cambrian way of being, which is presence without anticipation. Being here, in this water, in this dark, without the future, without the past, without anything except the gentle pressure of the water around you, and the soft silt beneath you, and the slow chemical monitoring of a world that is in this moment completely and simply fine. The Ordovician will come, the great Ordovician biodiversification, in which the diversity of marine animals will expand even beyond the explosion of the Cambrian, will follow this period in its geological turn. And then the late Ordovician mass extinction, the first of the big 5 mass extinctions in the history of complex life, will come and take out 60 to 70% of all marine species, and then recovery, and then the Silurian, and then the Devonian, and then the Permian extinction, the worst extinction in the history of complex life, the one that takes 90 to 96% of all marine species and renders the ocean nearly lifeless, and then recovery, again, the extraordinary resilience of life always reasserting itself against even the most catastrophic disruptions. None of this is here yet. The Ordovician is 50 million years away. The Permian extinction is 300 million years away. The asteroid that will end the dinosaurs is 500 million years away. These are distances in time so vast that they are meaningless in any human experiential sense. They are geological distances, temporal equivalents of the distances between stars. In the Cambrian night, none of them are close enough to matter. What is close is this: the current moment, the cold water, the soft silt, the chemical monitoring that reports nothing unusual, the community of Cambrian creatures resting and moving in the dark around you, the hydrothermal background hum, the faint pressure signature of the surface weather far above. These are the things that are close, the things that are present, the things that constitute the reality of the Cambrian night as it actually is, rather than as it might be interpreted through the lens of what will come after. There is a practice in some meditative traditions of directing attention entirely to the present moment, to what is actually here, actually now, actually being experienced, rather than to the thoughts and anticipations and memories that usually occupy the mind. This practice is difficult for creatures with minds as complex and anticipatory and memory-laden as human minds. But the Cambrian animals practice it naturally, effortlessly, because they have no alternative. They have no capacity for the mental time travel that makes the present moment hard to inhabit. They are here, in the Cambrian, because here is all there is. You can practice that simplicity tonight. Not by pretending you have no memory or anticipation, you cannot pretend that, but by borrowing, for the duration of this sleep, the Cambrian animal's relationship to the present moment, by allowing the cold water and the soft silt and the chemical monitoring and the slow current to be, for now, the whole world. By letting the future and the past rest while you rest, by inhabiting the Cambrian night as a Cambrian animal inhabits it, completely, without context, without distance, without the weight of the 500 million years that will follow. The weight of all that will come is real. The extinctions are real. The history is real. But it is not here yet, and in the not yet of the Cambrian night, there is a lightness, a freedom from the accumulated weight of all that has happened and all that will happen. That is one of the most restful things available to any creature capable of imagining it. Let yourself be light, then. Let the Cambrian Sea support you in your lightness. Let the future be future, in the places and times where future belongs, and let the present be here, in this ancient water, under this ancient darkness, in the company of creatures who have never known and will never know the weight of what comes after them. They are, in this sense, the lucky ones. Not because their lives are longer or richer or more comfortable. They are not by any measure that would matter to a modern creature, but because they are completely free of the knowledge of their own smallness in the vast scale of geological time. They simply are in the full and uncomplicated present of the Cambrian night, and that simplicity is a kind of grace. You can share it, for tonight you can set down the weight, you can be for these hours as present and as simple and as unburdened by what will come as the trilobite resting nearby, as the soft-bodied creatures on the microbial mat, as the patient sponges filtering the dark water in their ancient way. You can be Cambrian for the duration of the night, and in the morning, in your morning, the morning of your actual life, whenever that comes, you can pick the weight back up. It will still be there. It will wait. The water holds you now the same way it has held every creature that has ever lived in it, without preference, without judgment, without memory of who has rested here before or knowledge of who will rest hereafter. The ocean's holding is the most democratic and ancient act of support that exists. It does not ask what you carry. It does not weigh the burdens you brought with you into the night. It simply holds, in its cold and patient way, whatever arrives at its floor. And so the weight, all the accumulated weight of your waking life, the planning and the worrying and the anticipating and the remembering, is not gone exactly, but it is suspended. It floats around you in the water rather than pressing down on you from above. The ocean distributes the weight evenly, the way it distributes the pressure of all those fathoms above you evenly, so that no single surface bears more than any other. You are held, not pressed, supported, not burdened. The distinction is small and it is everything. But for now, the water is cold and the silt is soft and the darkness is complete, and the world is exactly as large and as small as this one particular patch of Cambrian seafloor, and that is enough. That is all there is. That is the whole world tonight, and it is perfect. The Cambrian night is in its deepest phase now. This is the hour, or the stretch of hours, because the Cambrian night at these latitudes is long, and the concept of hour belongs to a civilization that will not build calendars for another 540 million years, when the darkness is most complete, when the distance from the previous day is greatest and the distance from the next day is still considerable. This is the hour when rest is most natural, most complete, most deeply biological, when the body's chemistry is most oriented toward restoration and away from activity, when the mind, whatever mind means for the creature you are tonight, is most quiet. In the world above you, in the Cambrian atmosphere, the night air is cold. Not Arctic cold. The Cambrian climate at these latitudes and in this period is relatively warm, without the polar ice sheets that will develop and retreat and develop again in the much later history of the Earth. But the night air cools significantly from the daytime temperatures, and at this hour the cooling has been underway for many hours, and the air above the Cambrian Sea is at its nightly minimum. The stars, the Cambrian stars, arranged in patterns that no human eye will ever recognize as constellations, because no human eye exists yet, and when human eyes do exist the stars will have moved, are very bright in the cold, clear air, in the part of the sky away from the setting or rising moon. The surface of the sea, far above you, is dark and moving with the slow pattern of swells that cross the open ocean without obstruction. There are no significant land masses in the right positions to block the wave propagation across this part of the Cambrian world, and the swells move through the darkness without sound, without witness, without any creature watching them from above, because no creature capable of watching them from above yet exists. The surface of the Cambrian Sea at this hour is one of the most completely unwitnessed places in the history of the Earth. Beautiful, perhaps, the deep black water, the brilliant stars above, the long swells crossing in the dark, but with no one to see it. You cannot see it either, from down here. You're too deep for the surface to be anything but a distant chemical and pressure presence, a faint signature in the water properties that tells you something about the world above, without giving you any direct access to it. You are down here, in the dark, in the cold, and the surface might as well be another world, which in the ecological sense it is. The Cambrian world, even within the single ocean, is composed of many distinct ecological zones. The surface, the photic zone, where light penetrates and photosynthesis occurs and productivity is highest, is one world. The midwater, where the plankton migrate daily and where the predators that hunt them follow, is another. The seafloor, where you rest, with its sediment and its microbial mats and its community of benthic creatures, is another still. And within the seafloor environment there are gradients of depth and substrate type and oxygen availability that create further subdivisions. You are an inhabitant of a very particular ecological zone within this very particular ocean, and the world of the surface, though it ultimately sustains you, is as remote from your direct experience as the land. The land in the Cambrian period is not entirely barren. This might be surprising. The popular image of the Cambrian often focuses so entirely on the explosion of marine life that the terrestrial environment is forgotten. But the land is not nothing. There are microbial communities on land, crusts of photosynthetic bacteria and fungi and cyanobacteria that cover the surfaces of rocks near moisture, doing their slow work of weathering and biological crusting that is the precursor to everything that will eventually call the land home. They are not visible from the sea. They do not affect the ecology of the Cambrian Ocean in any very direct way, except as part of the watershed chemistry, as contributors to the mineral content of the rivers that drain into the sea. But they are there, doing their work, preparing the land in their patient way for the more complex life that will eventually come. None of this is visible from where you rest. The land is invisible, the surface is invisible, the midwater is invisible. Your world is this, the seafloor extending in all directions as far as your chemical senses can detect, which is not far. The water column above, detectable through its pressure and chemistry but not through sight. The sediment below, tactile and chemical, and densely biological but not visual. This is the entire world as you know it. A small, cold, dark, chemically rich bubble of perception centered on your resting body. And in this small world, the slow hours before dawn are the quietest hours. The community of Cambrian creatures around you has settled into its deepest nocturnal patterns. The trilobites are resting more completely now than they were earlier in the night. The filter feeders have reduced their filtration rate. Responding to the lower than daytime concentration of particles in the water, their feeding currents slower and less powerful. The worms that were moving through the sediment earlier have found their temporary stopping places and paused their burrowing. Even the bacteria and the microbial mat are operating at a slightly reduced rate, their metabolic processes slowed by the accumulated chemistry of the night, the slightly higher carbon dioxide, the slightly lower oxygen, the accumulation of metabolic byproducts that the reduced current of the deep night hours does not clear away as efficiently as the slightly stronger currents of the day. This is the deep quiet of the biological night, not silence, the ocean is never silent, but a lowering of the overall level of biological activity to its nightly minimum, a resting of the community, a drawing in of energetic resources toward maintenance and away from growth and movement and feeding, in the way that complex biological systems shift their priorities when the resources of the current cycle have been spent and the next cycle has not yet begun. You are part of this quieting. Your metabolic rate is lower now than it was when you were more active earlier in the night or in the day just past. Your nervous system's activity is lower. Your breathing, your respiration, continues at the minimum rate compatible with your metabolic needs. You're not cold in the way that a warm-blooded creature would be cold. You are approximately the temperature of the water around you, because you have no mechanism for generating or conserving body heat. The cold water is your temperature too, and the temperature is comfortable in the way that the temperature always is for a creature that has always lived at this temperature and cannot remember being any other way. The slow hours before dawn are a gift. They are the part of the night when the body's restoration is most complete, when the accumulated deficits of the active period have been most thoroughly addressed, when the systems that needed replenishing have been most thoroughly replenished. In modern biology, this period corresponds roughly to the deepest phases of sleep, the slow-wave sleep that dominates the early hours of the night, and the deep restorative processes that reach their maximum during those hours. Whether anything analogous occurs in the Cambrian creature you are tonight is not knowable, but the biology of restoration is ancient, and the hours of deepest rest are ancient, and there is every reason to believe that the slow hours before the Cambrian dawn are serving the same restorative function that the slow hours before dawn serve in every biological system complex enough to need restoration. Let yourself be in the slow hours, not counting them, not anticipating their end, not thinking about the dawn that will eventually arrive and the activity that dawn will bring. Just being in the slow hours, in the deepest quiet of the Cambrian night, in the most complete rest that this ancient world has to offer. The hours are long, the dark is deep, the cold is steady. Nothing is required of you. Nothing will be required for a long time yet. The Cambrian night continues to turn, very slowly, toward dawn. The Earth rotates on its axis at roughly the same speed it has always rotated, perhaps slightly faster in this early period, as the Moon's gravitational pull has been gradually slowing the rotation over billions of years, but not noticeably faster from one night's experience. The rotation is continuous. The night passes in the only way nights pass, by turning. But it has not yet turned far enough for dawn. The darkness remains, the cold remains, the quiet remains, and you remain in it, in the deepest part of the Cambrian night, in the most complete rest you have known in your young life, in this ancient and extraordinary sea. We have come almost to the end of our time in the Cambrian Sea. The night will not last much longer. The dawn is still far enough away that there is no trace of it yet in the water properties, no lightening of the upper column, no uptick in the activity of the photosynthetic organisms near the surface that would signal the approaching return of the sun. But the night is finite, and we are closer to its end than its beginning now, and soon the story of this particular Cambrian midnight will draw to its close. Before it does, there is one more thing to consider, one more thing to hold in the quiet of the deep water before the dawn begins its slow approach, and the world begins its slow return to activity. It is the thing named in the title of this story, the thing that everything in this long night has been building toward, the feeling, or the proto-feeling, or the chemical and neurological state that functions as a feeling of safety. Safety is a concept that requires certain things in order to exist. It requires, first, the possibility of danger, because without the possibility of danger, there is no safety, only the neutral absence of threat that characterizes a world without predation. In the world before the Cambrian, in the Ediacaran sea of soft bodies and passive filter feeders, there was no predation, and therefore no danger in the biologically meaningful sense, and therefore no safety either. The Ediacaran animals did not feel safe. They felt nothing about their relationship to threat, because threat for them did not exist. The Cambrian changed this. The Cambrian invented predation, and with predation it invented danger, and with danger it invented, or at least laid the groundwork for, safety. Because now there were creatures with nervous systems capable of registering threat, and those same nervous systems, when they were not registering threat, were in a state that was the neurological opposite of threat detection, a state of reduced alertness, a state of lower threshold for the alarm responses that predator presence triggers, a state that, in animals much more complex than you, would eventually be recognized as feeling safe. You're in that state tonight. Your chemoreceptors are monitoring the water and reporting no threat-associated chemical gradients. Your vibration-sensitive cells are registering no pressure waves that indicate the approach of a large predator. Your nervous system is running at its low-activity nighttime mode, not the high-alert mode that it would shift into if any of those threat signals appeared. In the most literal neurological sense available to a creature of your complexity, you are in a state of safety. And what does safety feel like? In the subjective sense, in the sense of what, if anything, is experienced by the creature in this state, the honest answer is that we cannot know. The subjective experience of any animal is not accessible from the outside, even in principle. We cannot know what it is like to be a bat, as the philosopher Thomas Nagel famously argued, let alone what it is like to be a Cambrian soft-bodied bilaterian on a deep-water seafloor 540 million years ago. The question of whether there is anything it is like to be you tonight is a question that cannot be answered. But there is something happening in your nervous system that corresponds to what safety corresponds to in the nervous systems of more complex animals. The neural circuits that would generate alarm responses are quiet. The chemical signals that would shift your behavior toward escape or defensive posture are not present. The threshold for responding to environmental changes has shifted upward. It takes a stronger signal to rouse you from your rest state than it would take during your active period. These are the neurological correlates of safety in any animal complex enough to have neurological correlates of anything. And the remarkable thing, the thing worth pausing on as we approach the end of the Cambrian night, is that this is among the first times in the history of life on Earth that any creature has been in this state. Not the first time ever. There have been Cambrian animals before you, and they too had nervous systems, and they too had states that corresponded to threat and to the absence of threat. But in the long history of life, the nervous system itself is so new that the states it produces are new. The experience of safety, or the proto-experience, the neurological state that will eventually, in much more complex nervous systems, become the conscious experience of safety, is among the most recent things the Earth has produced. Everything before the Cambrian was safe in the way that a stone is safe. Not because nothing could harm it. Plenty could harm a bacterial cell. Plenty of chemical and physical processes could destroy it, but because it lacked the neural architecture to have any relationship to the concept of harm, it could be destroyed, it could not fear destruction. The Cambrian animals are the first creatures that can, in any biological sense, fear destruction. And in being the first creatures that can fear, they are also the first creatures that can be safe. The safety you're feeling tonight, the quiet, chemical, neurological state of undisturbed rest in a world that your senses are reporting as threat-free, is new. It is one of the newest experiences available to any living thing on this planet. Newer than sight, which is also evolving in the Cambrian. Newer than hunger, which probably precedes the Cambrian in some form. Newer than the simple chemical responses to favourable and unfavourable conditions that bacteria have been making since before the Earth had cooled. This particular quality of rest, this particular absence of alarm in a creature complex enough to feel alarm, this is Cambrian, this is new. And it has persisted. That is the other extraordinary thing about this state. The feeling of safety, the neurological state that corresponds to the absence of immediate threat in an organism, with the biological architecture to recognize threat, has persisted in continuous biological inheritance from the Cambrian to the present. The neural architecture that produces it has been modified, elaborated, complexified by 500 million years of evolution. But the basic circuitry is ancient. The basic relationship between the absence of threat signals and the reduction of neural alertness is the same relationship that has existed since the first animals evolved nervous systems sensitive to predation. When you, tonight, the human you, the one listening to this story, feel safe enough to sleep, you are feeling something whose biological roots are in the Cambrian Sea. When your nervous system runs its own versions of the threat monitoring routines and finds nothing alarming and allows the sleep-promoting systems to take over, it is doing a version of what the Cambrian animal on the Cambrian seafloor is doing tonight in this story. The experience is vastly more complex in you. The neural systems involved are vastly more elaborate. But the basic relationship, the monitoring, the not finding, the relaxing into rest, is the same relationship. It is ancient. It is inherited. It is yours. You inherited safety from the Cambrian, the capacity to feel safe, really feel it neurologically, in the specific way that only creatures with nervous systems complex enough to feel danger can feel safety, is one of the gifts of the Cambrian Sea to all the animals that came after. It is, in its way, the gift of this night. The gift of lying in the cold dark and having nothing to flee from, and having a nervous system that knows this, and responds to it by settling, by lowering its alert level, by allowing the body and the brain to do the work of restoration rather than the work of vigilance. The Cambrian animal on the Cambrian seafloor rests in its ancient safety, in the deepest hours of its ancient night, and 500 million years later, in another world altogether, in a body that looks nothing like the soft-bodied bilaterian of the Cambrian Sea, but that carries within it the neural inheritance of that Cambrian night, another creature listens to this story and allows itself finally to do the same. Rest. The world is quiet. The monitors report nothing unusual. The systems can rest. The vigil can be suspended for now, for the duration of this night. You are safe, in the way that safety is always meant, in the language of the nervous system, that both the Cambrian creature and you have inherited from the same ancient biological source. You are safe. Sleep. The ocean teaches. This is not a metaphor, not a poetic conceit, not an anthropomorphizing of something that has no intentions and no pedagogy. It is a literal description of what the ocean has done over the 4 billion years of its existence in relation to the life that lives within it. Every adaptation that every marine organism has ever evolved has been, in the deepest sense, a lesson taught by the ocean, a response to what the ocean is, how it moves, what it contains, what it lacks, how it changes. The ocean has been the world's greatest teacher, and every creature in it is a student. You are studying tonight, even in rest, even in the deep biological quiet of the Cambrian midnight, the lesson continues. Your body is the accumulated record of everything the ocean has taught your lineage, every adaptation, every biochemical pathway, every structural feature of your cells and your body plan. You are, in the most literal sense, made of lessons. The ocean wrote your genome, one generation at a time, selecting for what worked and against what did not, over millions of years of continuous instruction. What has the Cambrian Ocean been teaching in this particular phase of its curriculum? Several things all at once, as the ocean always teaches. It has been teaching the lesson of calcium, that calcium is available in the water in forms that can be precipitated into hard structures, that hard structures provide advantages in a world where soft bodies are increasingly vulnerable to the new phenomenon of predation, that the chemistry of biomineralization is learnable and reproducible and heritable. Many Cambrian lineages are learning this lesson simultaneously, producing the diverse array of shells and sclerites and plates and spicules and tests that characterize the Cambrian fossil record. It has been teaching the lesson of oxygen, that oxygen is now available in concentration sufficient to fuel high-powered aerobic metabolism, that aerobic metabolism opens the door to body sizes and metabolic rates that anaerobic metabolism cannot sustain, that the physics of gas exchange across body surfaces sets limits on how large an organism can be without specialized respiratory systems. The Cambrian animals are learning these limits and beginning to evolve solutions to them. The earliest gills, the earliest circulatory systems that move oxygen-carrying fluid to tissues that cannot be reached by simple diffusion. It has been teaching the lesson of predation, that other organisms are a source of energy, that pursuing and catching other animals is an efficient way of accessing that energy, that this strategy creates selection pressure on the prey to develop defenses, and that defenses create selection pressure on the predators to develop better offensive capabilities in the escalating coevolutionary arms race that will define the ecology of every diverse marine community for the rest of the planet's biological history. And it has been teaching, perhaps most subtly and most profoundly, the lesson of integration, that the most successful organisms are not those that are best at any single thing, but those that best integrate multiple capabilities into a coherent, functional whole. The trilobite is not just a great eye maker, or just a great armor maker, or just a great burrower. It is an organism that integrates sophisticated vision with effective defensive armor, with efficient locomotion, with appropriate chemosensory systems, in a package that works together as a coordinated whole. The integration is the achievement. You are integrated too. Whatever you are, Whatever the specific body plan of the Cambrian creature you inhabit tonight, you are an integration of capabilities that work together to make you a viable organism in the Cambrian Sea. Your chemosensors work with your nervous system, works with your muscles, works with your body plan, works with your metabolism, works with your ability to find food and avoid danger. None of these systems would be sufficient on its own. Together they are enough. And the ocean taught you how to put them together over the millions of generations of your lineage's existence. The ocean is patient as a teacher. It does not demand that the lesson be learned quickly. It does not fail the students who take longer to arrive at the right answer, or the students who arrive at a different answer that also works. The ocean has been teaching for 4 billion years, and it will continue to teach for billions more, and in all that time it has never once expressed impatience with the slowness of the learning process. Evolution is slow. The ocean is not bothered. It teaches at exactly the pace that evolution can absorb. The ocean has been teaching since before the Cambrian, before complex animals, before anything larger than a single cell. The early ocean had only microbial students. The lessons in those first 3 billion years were chemical and metabolic. How to harvest energy from sunlight, from sulfur, from iron, from hydrogen. How to build cell membranes that keep the inside in and the outside out. How to copy genetic information reliably enough that the copies could also learn. These are the foundational lessons, the prerequisites, without which none of the Cambrian curriculum would have been possible. You arrived at school after most of the prerequisites had already been taught and tested. The basic chemistry of life, the ATP synthesis, the DNA replication, the protein folding. All of this was worked out over billions of years before your lineage existed. You inherited an extraordinary foundation. The Cambrian animals, yourself included tonight in this borrowed body, are advanced students, building on lessons that were learned and consolidated long before the Cambrian began. The ocean is already deeply wise by the time this night occurs. There is comfort in being a late arrival to a curriculum that has been thoroughly developed. You do not have to figure out photosynthesis or the cell membrane or the genetic code. Those problems have been solved, the solutions selected and refined and passed down through uncountable generations, and now they are simply part of what you are. You breathe, in whatever form breathing takes for a Cambrian animal on the seafloor at midnight, and the breathing works because billions of years of students before you worked out how breathing ought to work. You are the beneficiary of all that prior learning. There is something deeply calming about this patience. The ocean's pedagogical patience is not the patience of someone waiting for something to happen. It is the patience of something that exists on a timescale, where the distinction between waiting and not waiting becomes meaningless. The ocean does not wait. It simply is, and in being what it is, it creates the conditions for learning, and the learning happens at whatever pace the learners can manage. You are resting in the classroom tonight, or rather, the classroom is resting around you, because the classroom never closes. The ocean's instruction is continuous whether or not any particular organism is in an active learning state. The lesson continues in the background of your rest. The chemical composition of the water continues to exert its selection pressures. The biological community continues to evolve in response to the conditions of the moment. The slow instruction of the ocean continues in its patient and unhurried way. And when you wake, when the Cambrian dawn comes and you return to your active state, you will continue your education. Every interaction with the physical world around you, every feeding attempt and every near miss with a predator, and every moment of navigating through the complex chemical landscape of the Cambrian Sea is a lesson. Most of the lessons will not be consciously registered, in any sense that the word conscious can apply to a creature of your complexity. But they will be registered in the adjustments to your behavioral tendencies, in the modifications to your sensory thresholds, in the slow evolutionary accumulation of responses that work better than responses that do not work. The ocean teaches everything worth knowing if you have enough time and patience to learn, and the Cambrian is patient. The Cambrian has 540 million years of patience already behind it, and more ahead. It will wait while you learn. It will wait while you rest. It will wait while the night completes its slow turning toward the dawn that is coming. The ocean has always waited, and it has always eventually been right, and tonight is no different. Rest in the classroom. Let the lesson continue in the background. The ocean will keep teaching while you sleep, and in the morning, whenever morning comes, in whatever form morning takes in your particular existence. The lesson will still be there, waiting to be continued. The ocean is never done teaching, and you are never done learning. But tonight, for these slow hours before the Cambrian dawn, the learning can rest. The student is allowed to sleep. The ocean will keep the classroom open. It always has. It always will. The cold water and the soft silt and the chemical richness of the ancient ocean are all part of the same patient instruction, the same ongoing invitation to become more than what you were before. You are becoming, even in rest. Even in the deepest quiet of the Cambrian midnight you are becoming. Let it happen slowly. Let it happen in the dark. Let the ocean do its patient work while you sleep. There is a philosophy in being small. Not a philosophy that anyone has articulated yet. Philosophy as a discipline will not be invented for another 530 million years or so, and even then its practitioners will for a long time fail to notice that the most important philosophical lessons are embedded in the natural world rather than in the arguments of human scholars. But a philosophy that the Cambrian Sea embodies in every soft-bodied creature that rests on its floor in the quiet dark, the philosophy of being exactly the right size for the world you inhabit. You're small. This has been noted before, but it deserves further attention, because the smallness is not incidental. It is one of the most important things about you. In a world that is just beginning to discover the advantages of large size, where the evolutionary arms race between predators and prey is just starting to push body sizes upward in some lineages, being small is still a perfectly viable strategy. More than viable, it is, for a creature of your particular position in the Cambrian ecosystem, probably optimal. Small means you need less food, less oxygen, less space to move through in search of both. The metabolic needs of a small organism scale with something less than the cube of its body dimensions, meaning that as organisms get larger, their resource requirements grow faster than their body volume does. A creature 10 times your size needs not 10 times your food intake, but something much closer to 1,000 times. This scaling is the fundamental constraint that limits how large organisms can get without evolving highly specialized systems for acquiring and processing energy. You are below the threshold where these constraints become acute. You are in the sweet spot of small animal existence, where the resource needs are modest, the energy budget is manageable, and the simple metabolic machinery you have inherited from your microbial ancestors is adequate to meet those needs without requiring any particularly elaborate additions. You do not need a heart, though your descendants will eventually need hearts when they get large enough that simple diffusion can no longer move nutrients and oxygen to all of their tissues. You do not need lungs or gills in the specialized sense, though your descendants will eventually need those too. You're small enough to get by with what you have. Small also means you're invisible to most threats. In a world where the threats that exist are calibrated to the prey sizes of the current Cambrian fauna, a creature significantly smaller than the average prey item is effectively beneath the detection threshold of most predators. Anomalocaris, with its large grasping appendages and its sophisticated compound eyes, is hunting things that are worth the energy expenditure of pursuit. A creature as small as you may simply not register as a viable prey item, not worth the energy cost of capture relative to the caloric return. This is not safety by strength, or by speed, or by armor, but safety by invisibility, by falling below the threshold of predatory interest. There is a third advantage to smallness that is perhaps the least obvious, but may be the most profound in the long run. Small size enables rapid reproduction. The generation time of a small organism is shorter than the generation time of a large organism because less growth is required to reach reproductive maturity. And short generation times mean more rapid evolution, because each generation is an opportunity for new mutations to be tested against the conditions of the current world and for beneficial mutations to spread through the population. The small organisms of the Cambrian, and there are many of them, most of them smaller even than you, are evolving at a pace that the large organisms cannot match. This rapid evolution is part of what makes the Cambrian such an extraordinary period for biological diversification. The small organisms of the early Cambrian are diversifying at rates that will not be matched in most of the geological periods that follow, because the combination of available niches and short generation times creates exactly the conditions for rapid evolutionary exploration of the space of possible body plans. You are part of this diversification. a representative of whatever lineage is currently exploring whatever particular corner of body plan space your particular combination of features represents. And the philosophy embedded in all of this, in the smallness, in the invisibility, in the rapid evolution, in the perfect fit between your size and the requirements of your world, is something like this. There is no universally right size. There is only the right size for the conditions you face, the food you eat, the threats you navigate, the opportunities you can exploit. The Cambrian Sea is demonstrating this philosophy on every stretch of its floor, in every water column, in every chemical gradient. That size is a variable to be optimized for context, not a virtue to be maximized. Humans, coming from a lineage that has spent most of its recent evolutionary history competing with other large primates for ecological dominance, tend to think of large size as inherently better than small size. The world of human experience is dominated by things larger than humans, trees, mountains, oceans, the sky, and by things that are powerful in proportion to their size. The bias toward largeness runs deep, but the Cambrian Sea knows better. The Cambrian Sea knows that the most numerous, the most diverse, the most ecologically important creatures at any given time in the history of life are almost always the small ones. The bacteria, the protists, the small invertebrates, the tiny zooplankton. The large creatures are impressive, the small ones run the world. You are part of the world running small, not consciously, not with any awareness of your own ecological importance, but functionally, through the role your kind plays in processing organic matter and cycling nutrients, and serving as the base of food webs that more complex creatures depend on. Without the small organism layer, the Cambrian ecosystem collapses. Without you, or things like you, the filter feeders have nothing to filter, and the deposit feeders have nothing to deposit feed, and the sediment chemistry changes in ways that reduce the habitability of the seafloor for everyone else. The philosophy of small things is the philosophy of the foundation, of the essential work that happens at the base, in the dark, in the cold, without recognition, without witness, without the drama that the large creatures at the apex of the food web are engaged in. It is the philosophy of the patient and the persistent, of the creatures that have been doing their essential work for billions of years before the large and dramatic creatures arrived, and will be doing it for billions of years after the large and dramatic creatures are gone. You are patient, you are persistent, you are doing your essential work tonight, even in rest, because the metabolic processes that constitute your existence are the metabolic processes that fuel the Cambrian ecosystem, and they do not stop when you rest. The philosophy of small things includes the philosophy of continuous work, of process that does not require interruption, of systems that run even when no one is watching. Let that philosophy settle over you as you continue to rest. You are small and you are essential, and you are doing exactly what the Cambrian Sea requires of you, in exactly the right place, at exactly the right size, in the deepest hours of the ancient night. There is nothing more to be. There is no larger version of yourself that would be better. You are already perfectly sized for this world, in this moment, in this particular cold and dark and silt-floored corner of the early Cambrian Sea. The philosophy of small things says, this is enough, you are enough, and the philosophy is right. The current moves through the Cambrian deep water in a pattern that has been established by the configuration of the ocean basins, by the temperature differential between the equatorial surface and the deep cold water of the poles, by the slow rotation of the Earth that deflects all moving fluid to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern. These are the same physical forces that drive the ocean currents of the modern world. The same Coriolis effect, the same thermohaline circulation, the same basic ocean physics, operating in a different geometry of continents and basins, but producing the same kinds of large-scale circulation. The current that reaches you here at the bottom of the Cambrian Sea is a very attenuated version of those large-scale circulations. By the time the water that drives the global thermohaline circulation has made its way down through the water column and along the seafloor to this particular location, it has slowed to a gentle drift, a background flow that is barely perceptible as directed movement, but that is constant and important. It is this background flow that supplies the deep water with whatever oxygen it has. It is this background flow that removes the metabolic byproducts, the carbon dioxide, the organic acids, that the biological community of the seafloor produces. Without it, the deep water would become stagnant, the oxygen would be depleted, and most of the organisms that currently inhabit the deep sea floor would die. You feel the current as a constant, very gentle directional pressure. It comes from one side and moves through you to the other, in the sense that it moves through the water around you, and you are in the water, and therefore part of the fluid system through which the current flows. It is not strong enough to move you unless you're actively allowing yourself to drift with it. It is simply there, a background physical fact of the Cambrian deep water, as consistent and as unremarkable as the cold temperature and the darkness. Against this background current, the deep water is also full of smaller scale movements. The gentle turbulence produced by the movement of organisms through the water, the slight thermal convection produced by the heat emanating from the seafloor sediment, which is warmer than the overlying water because of the geothermal heat flux from the Earth's interior, the small pressure waves generated by the settling of particles from above. These smaller scale movements overlay the background current in a complex pattern that, if you had the sensory apparatus to map it in 3 dimensions, would look like nothing so much as the detailed turbulence of a slow-moving stream, the same large-scale flow in one direction, the same smaller eddies and swirls superimposed on the larger motion. Your chemosensory organs experience this complex flow as a constantly shifting pattern of chemical information. The gradient of food-associated chemicals is not a simple slope pointing in one direction. It is a 3-dimensional mosaic, shaped by the currents and eddies, and the patchy distribution of food sources, constantly shifting as the flow pattern shifts. Navigating through this chemical landscape, which your kind must do during active periods, following the gradients toward food while avoiding the gradients toward danger, requires a level of sensory integration that, simple as it is by later standards, represents a significant achievement over the chemical navigation of single-celled organisms. But tonight you are not navigating, you are still. And in your stillness, the current moves through the world around you without demanding anything of you. It carries its chemical messages past your senses, and you register them, automatically and without effort, as part of the background monitoring that your nervous system runs even in rest. The messages say, nothing has changed. The food gradient is the same as it was when you last checked. The threat gradient is absent, as it has been all night. The temperature is steady. The oxygen level is adequate. Everything that needs to be known about the world is known, and nothing that is known requires action. There is a pleasure in this, or something that functions like a pleasure, in the neurological sense of a state that an organism tends to remain in, rather than to escape from. The state of appropriate stillness in an undisturbed environment, with all sensors reporting normal values and all systems running at rest mode levels, is a state that organisms with nervous systems tend to maintain rather than interrupt unnecessarily. It is the state toward which the nervous system steers in the absence of compelling reasons to do otherwise. It is, in the most biological and non-metaphorical sense, the preferred state. You are in the preferred state. The current moves. You are still. The two coexist without contradiction, the world moving gently around you while you remain essentially motionless, the chemical landscape shifting slowly in the current's influence while your senses report nothing that requires your participation. The current and the still are not opposites in the Cambrian deep water, they are partners. The current maintains the conditions that make the stillness possible, the oxygen, the food chemistry, the temperature stability. The stillness of the benthic organisms allows the current to carry its chemical messages clearly, without the turbulence that the active movement of many organisms simultaneously would produce. Current and still, active and resting, moving water and motionless creature. These are the paired conditions of the Cambrian midnight, the world doing its constant work of circulation and chemistry and biological activity, while the individual organism in the moment of rest does the personal work of restoration and maintenance. Both are necessary. Both are happening simultaneously. The world does not stop so that you can rest. You do not stop the world by resting. The two continue together, in their ancient and coordinated way, each enabling the other. The Cambrian current that moves through the deep water tonight is carrying organic particles settled from above, dissolved nutrients from the sediment, chemical traces of all the biological activity happening in every part of the ocean basin that this water has passed through. It is carrying the chemical history of the water, the accumulated record of everything that has happened in the water above and around and distant from you, compressed into gradients of molecule concentrations that your sensors read without effort. If you could read that history, if your sensors were sophisticated enough to decode all the information carried in the chemical complexity of the Cambrian deep water, you would be reading the story of an entire ocean. Every phytoplankton bloom and every zooplankton grazing event and every dead animal sinking through the water column and every volcanic eruption on the ocean floor and every input of fresh river water to the coastal margins. All of it leaves chemical traces that the ocean carries, distributed and diluted but present in the deep water that circulates slowly around the globe. You're receiving a very small part of that story tonight. Your primitive chemosensors are reading the nearest and strongest signals, the local food gradients, the local chemical environment of the immediate seafloor. The larger story is there in the water, but below your threshold of detection, buried in the noise of the local chemistry, inaccessible without the sophisticated analytical chemistry that will not be invented for another 500 million years. But the local story is enough. The local story says safe, undisturbed, chemically appropriate, all parameters within the range that your biology has learned to associate with adequate conditions for rest. The current confirms it. The stillness confirms it. The whole Cambrian night confirms it moment by moment in the continuous and automatic monitoring that your nervous system runs even as it approaches the deepest level of rest available to a creature of your complexity. The current moves, you are still, and this is good. There is a moment in the approach to sleep when the mind, the human mind, the one that has been following this story through all its passages of Cambrian darkness, begins to lose the distinction between the story and the dreaming. When the cold water and the soft silt and the ancient dark begin to be not just images that the imagination has constructed, but something that feels more immediate, more bodily, more present. This is the moment that the story has been building toward. This is where the Cambrian Sea and the sleeping mind converge. You have been in the Cambrian tonight. Not literally. You have been wherever you are in whatever bed or chair or quiet space you have chosen for listening, but in the only sense that matters for sleep, in your nervous system's internal model of the world. Your nervous system has been running a simulation of the Cambrian Sea, building from the descriptions offered by this story a version of the cold water and the soft silt and the darkness and the community of ancient creatures, and to the degree that simulation has been convincing, to the degree that it has engaged the imagery and the sensation rather than the analytical and critical faculties, it has been doing the work of sleep, quieting the parts of the mind that stay alert to the ordinary present and inviting the deeper, slower, more ancient parts to become active. The ancient parts, this is worth pausing on, even at this late hour. There are parts of your nervous system that are genuinely ancient, not in the metaphorical sense of feeling old, but in the literal sense of being descended with modification from the nervous system structures of very early animals. The brainstem, in particular, the oldest part of the vertebrate brain in evolutionary terms, the part that controls breathing and heart rate, and the basic regulation of wakefulness and sleep, is an evolutionary ancient structure, continuous in its basic organization with the neural structures of very early vertebrates, which are themselves descended from the neural organization of even earlier animals. When you sleep, it is these ancient structures that take the lead. The newer, more recently evolved parts of the brain, the neocortex, the prefrontal regions that support planning and self-reflection, and the kind of analytical thinking that you have been doing while following this story, these quiet down during sleep, and the older structures, the brainstem and the limbic system, and the deep subcortical structures that have been doing their work since long before the neocortex evolved, these continue. They continue the work of regulation, of maintaining the body's physiology through the night, of running the dream process that the sleeping mind generates. You are turning toward those ancient structures now as the story draws toward its close, turning away from the analytical and toward the experiential, away from the thinking about the Cambrian Sea and toward the being in the Cambrian Sea, in whatever degree that is possible for a sleeping human mind. The distinction between the two, thinking about a thing and being in a thing, is one that the conscious mind maintains rigorously, but that sleep tends to blur. In the half-sleep, in the hypnagogic state between waking and dreaming, the boundary becomes porous. The Cambrian Sea can become more real than the room you're in, and the room you're in can become as remote and as abstract as the history you've been hearing. Let that happen. This is the invitation of the story. to let the Cambrian Sea become, for the duration of the sleep that is coming, more real than the ordinary world, to inhabit it, for these hours, in the way that dreams inhabit their own internal worlds, completely, without the ironic distance that waking experience maintains, to be, for the night, in the cold, dark water on the soft silt, surrounded by the ancient community of Cambrian creatures, part of the first chapter of the story of animal life on Earth. The surface of things is where the waking mind lives. The surface of things is the interface between the self and the world, the sensory boundary where the nervous system translates physical reality into the internal model that constitutes experience. It is a busy, complicated, demanding place to live, the surface of things. It requires constant attention, constant updating of the model, constant management of the gap between what is expected and what is actually happening. Sleep is the retreat from the surface. In sleep, the monitoring of the actual external world is largely suspended, the sensory inputs are gated, the attention is turned inward, the model of the world is allowed to run on its own internal dynamics rather than on the continuous update from external reality. The world you inhabit in sleep is not the external world. It is the internal model, running free. And what your internal model is running tonight, what the dreaming mind will find when it turns away from the surface of things and into the interior, is the Cambrian Sea, the cold water, the soft silt, the slow current, the community of creatures resting in the dark, the ancient safety of a world that has been here for billions of years and will be here long after you've gone. This is what the story has been building in your nervous system, one paragraph at a time. A place to retreat to. A place that is deep and dark and cold and safe and full of the quiet wonders of the most ancient chapter of the story of animal life. Go there now, or let yourself be taken there, because in truth the going does not require effort. It only requires the cessation of effort, the release of the sustained attention that keeps the surface of things in focus. Let the focus soften. Let the surface become less important. Let the Cambrian Sea, which has been present in the background of this story from the first word, waiting patiently while the analytical mind processed the information and the thinking mind considered the implications. Let the Cambrian Sea come to the foreground. The water is cold. Feel it. The silt is soft. Feel it. The darkness is complete. Rest in it. The current moves very gently through the water around you, bringing its ancient chemistry and its chemical messages of normalcy and safety, and your senses receive those messages and your nervous system processes them, and the result is stay, rest. This is the right place. This is the right time. This is the moment for which all the preparation of the night has been in service. The Cambrian creatures around you are also resting, or doing whatever it is they do in the deep hours before dawn. The trilobite with its compound eyes open and seeing nothing. The sponges filtering the water in their patient, ancient, unhurried way. The worms somewhere in the sediment having made their traces, their work for the night complete. The soft-bodied animals of the Ediacaran tradition, still present in the early Cambrian though their time as the dominant fauna is ending, resting in their particular way on the surface of the mat. All of them are here, in the Cambrian night. All of them are resting in their own particular ways, according to their own particular biologies, in the same cold, dark water. And you are here among them, your kind resting on the silt, your sensors running their quiet automatic monitoring, your nervous system doing its ancient restoration work while the world continues around you, in its patient and unhurried way. This is the surface of things, reached from below, the surface of the sediment, where the biological world meets the geological world, the surface of the water, where the ocean meets the sky, the surface of consciousness, where the waking mind meets the dreaming mind. You're at the surface of things, and the surface is yielding, and beneath it is the deep water of sleep, and the deep water is waiting. Let yourself through the surface. The cold water is on the other side, the ancient dark is on the other side, the Cambrian Sea in its fullness is on the other side. And it is safe. It has always been safe. Your senses said so all night, and they were right, and they are right now, through the surface and into the deep where the rest is. Every sediment layer is a sentence in a very long story. The story has no author and no reader, or rather, it has had no reader until very recently, until the peculiar species that will eventually emerge from the lineages present in this Cambrian Sea develops the cognitive tools to read what the sediment has written. But the story is there, in the layers, written in the language of chemistry and grain size and biological content, waiting across 500 million years for someone to decipher it. The sediment around you tonight is writing its sentence even now. The particles settling from the water column above, the organic matter, the mineral grains, the shells and tests of tiny organisms, are adding themselves to the top of the accumulating record. The biological community on the seafloor surface is leaving its impressions in the uppermost layer, burrow traces and body outlines, and the chemical signatures of organisms that lived and died here. The current is sorting the settling particles by size, depositing the finest materials in the still water of the deepest zone where you rest, and the slightly coarser materials on the higher energy slopes and ridges of the nearby seafloor topography. All of this will be preserved. Not all of it. Much will be destroyed by the same biological and chemical processes that happen in sediment, by the bioturbation of burrowing animals and the oxidation of organic matter and the dissolution of mineral phases that are not in equilibrium with the pore water chemistry. But some of it will survive. Some of the finest details of this particular moment in the Cambrian Sea will be captured in the rock record and will persist, compressed and lithified and eventually uplifted to the surface by geological forces for 500 million years, waiting to be found. The story the sediment tells is not a narrative story. It does not have a plot or characters or a moral. It is a factual story, or as close to factual as any record of historical events can be. It says, at this time, in this place, the water chemistry was this, the organisms present were these kinds, the current was this strong, the oxygen level was approximately this, the sediment input rate was approximately this. All of this is encoded in the layers, in the alternating light and dark laminations that represent seasonal variations in productivity, in the distribution of trace fossils that represents the activity of burrowing animals, in the geochemistry of the mineral phases that represents the water chemistry at the time of deposition. Geologists and paleontologists of the far future will read these sentences. They will chip the rock from exposures in mountains and quarries and road cuts, and they will carry the samples back to their laboratories, and they will analyze them with instruments of extraordinary sensitivity, and they will reconstruct the story of the Cambrian Sea from what the sediment has preserved. They will know, with remarkable precision, given the distance in time and the imperfection of the record, what the ocean was like when this sediment was deposited. They will know the temperature approximately. They will know the oxygen level approximately. They will know what organisms were present, at least those whose remains were durable enough to survive the diagenesis that turned sediment into rock. And in some of those rock samples, if the conditions of preservation were exactly right, and the diagenesis was gentle enough to preserve fine details, they may find the trace of a soft-bodied bilaterian creature, the impression of a body on the ancient seafloor, preserved because the animal rested on a microbial mat that bound the sediment tightly enough to capture the impression before it could be disturbed. A record of your presence, not your bones, you have no bones, not your shell, you have no shell. Just the faintest impression of your soft body on the ancient silt, the negative space that your presence created in the microbial mat. This is perhaps the most intimate form of fossilization that exists, not the replacement of hard parts by mineral, not the casting of a shell in sediment, but the direct impression of a soft body in mud. It is fragile, easily destroyed by the slightest disturbance, preserved only under the most favourable conditions. But when it is preserved, it is extraordinarily direct. It is not a record of the organism's chemistry or its hard parts or its genetic material. It is the record of its presence, of the fact that it was here, in this place, at this moment, occupying this space. You are occupying this space right now. The impression you are leaving in the microbial mat is being made right now as you rest. Whether it will survive the diagenesis, and the 500 million years of geological time between this night and the moment when someone might find it, this is not something you can know or control. The probability is very low. The vast majority of organisms that have ever lived leave no trace in the fossil record. Their existence is real, but their persistence in the record is not. They lived and died, and their matter was recycled, and the record closed over them without a mark. But some leave marks, some are preserved, and the marks they leave are the most precious records in the history of science. The the windows into worlds that no living observer can access directly, the evidence that allows scientists to reconstruct the biology and ecology and environment of periods that would otherwise be completely inaccessible. Every Cambrian fossil ever found was once a living creature, in a world very much like the world you're resting in right now. Every trace fossil in the Cambrian rock was made by an animal like the animals around you tonight. Every chemical signature preserved in the Cambrian sediment was created by the same biological processes running in the same water chemistry that surrounds you now. The sediment is telling your story tonight. Not your individual story, not the particular events of this particular night, or the specific details of your particular biology, but the story of the Cambrian Sea and what lived in it, and how and under what conditions. Your story is part of that larger story, even if the details of your individual existence are lost. You're part of the evidence. You're part of the record. Not in the form of a preserved fossil, probably, but in the form of the chemical and biological contributions that your existence makes to the chemistry of the sediment and the water, the metabolic byproducts, the trace elements incorporated into your tissues, the small modifications to the local sediment chemistry that result from your presence and your feeding and your eventual death. The sediment remembers everything in its imperfect and selective and probabilistic way. Not every organism, not every event, not every detail, but the broad outlines, the characteristic chemistry, the essential nature of the world that was. And from those remembered outlines, scientists of the far future will be able to reconstruct something genuine, something real about the Cambrian Sea and what lived in it, and what it was like to live there. They will reconstruct a world that you are inhabiting right now. They will look at their data and their models and their fossils, and they will say, this is what the Cambrian deep water was like. This is the community of organisms that lived on the seafloor. This is the chemistry of the water approximately. This is the temperature approximately. This is what it was 540 million years ago, in the sea where the first complex animals lived their first complex lives. And they will be right, approximately. They will be reading the story that the sediment is writing tonight, with your presence as one of the elements of that story, your chemistry as one of the chemical signatures in the record, your existence as one of the data points in the reconstruction of the Cambrian world. You're writing yourself into the geological record right now, in the smallest and most indirect way, simply by being here and doing what you do and leaving the faintest possible traces of your passage through this ancient sea. The sediment is the most honest record that exists. It does not editorialize. It does not emphasize the dramatic moments at the expense of the ordinary ones. It records everything that happens at the seafloor: the arrival of a food particle, the passage of a current, the burrowing of a small worm, the settling of a shell from a creature that lived in the water column above, with the same impartial attention. Every event receives exactly the representation it deserves in the sediment, which is to say, the representation that the physics and chemistry of deposition allow. Nothing more, nothing less. This is a kind of fairness that the historical records of later civilizations will struggle to achieve. Human history is written by the survivors, by the powerful, by those who had access to the tools of documentation. The sediment has no such biases. The small and the large, the predator and the prey, the organism that flourished and the organism that died young and left no descendants, all of them are represented in the sediment, each according to what they left behind, each according to the chemistry they contributed to the record. The trilobite that lived for years appears in the sediment as a shed exoskeleton. The soft-bodied worm that lived for days appears as a burrow trace. Neither is more important than the other in the sediment. Both are simply there. You will appear in the sediment too, in whatever form is available to your particular body plan. Perhaps as a trace, a path in the surface layer, a disturbance in the arrangement of grains, a slight chemical anomaly in the organic content of the uppermost millimeters, perhaps as nothing at all visible to a future observer, but as a statistical regularity in the assemblage of organisms, one more data point in the reconstruction of what lived here and in what proportions. You matter to the sediment in the same way everything matters to the sediment, which is to say, you are part of the record whether you mean to be or not. There is something restful about this automatic inclusion. You do not have to do anything to be remembered by the sediment. You do not have to be extraordinary. You do not have to accomplish something unusual or leave a mark that distinguishes you from all the other creatures that have rested in this same patch of Cambrian seafloor. You simply have to be here, and the sediment will do the rest. It will record your presence in its patient, chemical, grain-by-grain way, and 500 million years from now someone will read that record approximately, and know that something lived here in the Cambrian night. The sediment will remember. Sleep well and let it do its patient work of remembering around you. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. Now, let the Cambrian Sea have you entirely. You're on the seafloor. The silt is soft beneath you. The water is cold, and the cold is not uncomfortable. It is simply the temperature of this ancient world, the temperature at which this ocean has always been, the temperature that your body has known since before it knew anything else. The darkness is complete. Not the darkness of a room with the curtains drawn, not the darkness of a night with clouds over the moon, but the absolute, perfect, geological darkness of the deep water where light has simply never reached. You're small and soft and quiet. Your nervous system is running at its lowest register. The chemical signals your sensors receive from the water around you say, safe, still, unchanged. The same signals they have been sending all night. The same signals they will send through the remaining hours of darkness. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to become. You're already what you are, and what you are is enough for this world, in this moment, on this night. The current moves through the water very slowly. You can feel it, if feeling is the right word. A slight steady pressure that comes from one direction and moves through you like a breath. The current has been here for as long as the ocean has been here. It will be here long after this particular night has passed and accumulated into the geological record, pressed flat by the weight of all the sediment that will be deposited above it over the next 500 million years. The current does not know about time, it just moves, slow and steady and indifferent and continuous. Your breathing, your respiration, happens without any effort on your part. The oxygen crosses your body wall into your tissues, and the carbon dioxide crosses back out into the water in the simple exchange of dissolved gases that sustains you, that has sustained every aerobic organism since oxygen became available in the ocean more than 2 billion years ago. You do not need to manage this. Your cells know how. They have always known how. Rest in the knowledge that the biology runs itself. The microbial mat beneath you is doing its ancient work. The bacteria are cycling their elements, exchanging their gases, building their microscopic structures in the quiet dark. They will do this all night. They will do this after you have gone. They will do this for billions of years after the Cambrian has become ancient history. The mat is the oldest form of life on Earth, and it is under you right now, and it is fine. Everything is fine. Let the weight of your body press into the silt. Let the silt receive you. Let the water hold you from above and on all sides, the gentle hydraulic embrace of an ancient ocean doing what oceans do. There is nowhere else you need to be. There is no other version of this moment in which you are somewhere different or doing something else. You are here, completely, in the Cambrian midnight, in the cold, dark water, on the soft silt. The night is very long. The Cambrian night is as long as it has always been, as long as it will be for every night that follows, determined by the turning of the earth and the position of the sun below the horizon. The night will hold for hours more, and in those hours you do not need to do anything except allow the rest to continue. Allow the cells to do their restoration work. Allow the nervous system its quiet maintenance. Allow the ocean to hold you in its cold and patient arms. Somewhere far above, the stars of the Cambrian sky are doing what stars do. The moon, if it is up, is doing what the moon does. The surface of the sea is dark and moving with the slow pattern of waves crossing in the dark, and none of that light reaches you here, and none of that movement disturbs the perfect stillness of the deep water where you rest. You are the first complex animal that ever felt safe in the dark. The first creature with a nervous system sophisticated enough to register the absence of threat and respond to it not with frantic activity or anxious monitoring but with rest. True rest. The rest that comes when the nervous system, having checked all its inputs and found nothing alarming, allows the body to settle into the minimum activity state that restores it for the demands of the next day. This is what you are doing. This is what you have always been doing in this Cambrian night, and it is enough. It is more than enough. It is in fact the beginning of everything. Let yourself go a little deeper. Not into the sediment. You're already resting on the surface of it, exactly where you need to be. Deeper into the rest. Deeper into the quiet. Deeper into the ancient, generous, patient dark of the Cambrian Sea, which is holding you tonight as it has always held you, without asking anything in return, without condition, without expectation. The water is cold, the dark is complete, the silt is soft, and you are resting deeply in the first chapter of the story of all of us. Sleep well, the Cambrian will keep watch. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments. What ancient world would you like to visit next?